All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all. Are there any questions about the agenda tonight? Pansy, any updates from you?
I do have one update. So I just wanted to give a brief Tech Branch update. So I think we have had a lot of interest on social media. So there've been a lot of people following along with this. Just a little bit of a reminder, we did issue notice last week on Wednesday. We did remove 111 animals from that was 100 hamsters and rats. I think most of those were hamsters and 11 puppies. Not on the list. I also know there were crickets. So we also did take some crickets. So that we have been in communication with the owner. So the cost of care for the animals was pretty significant. So at this point, the owner has relinquished the right to the animals. That allowed sort of the clock to stop on her expenses related to the care of the animals. So at this point, we have received relinquishment of the animals. And so those are now officially transferred to Riverdale Animal Shelter. The puppies are in quarantine and they will be monitoring the sort of the health and suitability of the dogs for adoption for a little bit of a little while. So we don't anticipate that there will be any of the puppies that will be available for adoption potentially for up to several weeks. So but ultimately I think all of the animals are being cared for. We appreciate the work of our finance team, our animal control team, and the partnership of Riverdale that allowed this to all play out pretty smoothly. And that's it.
Thank you. Pam, any questions for any updates from you?
No, thank you.
All right, we could jump right into things. We have an update on the ALPR technology.
And so I'm going to hand this right to the chief, I think, for a brief introduction. This is a follow-up. I do want to make sure that both the public and the council know there's a pretty lengthy memo that is attached. And so we'll briefly touch in this presentation on some of the content in the email, but the focus of this presentation is sort of the key policy issues and direction that was given to the council at your last discussion. With that, I'll give the floor to the chief.
And my boss just said everything I was going to say, so I'm going to turn it right over to Chad.
All right, thank you. As mentioned, we're going to provide some follow-up to council regarding the department's use of the automatic license plate reader technology, specifically some updates from the February 3rd meeting itself. Just as a reminder and some follow-up or background, the department first began utilizing the LPR system in 2019 with the use of the Leonardo camera system. We then expanded the use of the LPR system in 2022. We first began using the flock safety cameras, and we expanded on that system in 2024. Again, here are the locations of our current LPR cameras. Again, all of them were specifically deployed primarily at ingress locations in the city with the intent of being able to utilize these systems to help prevent crime or additional crimes from occurring. As mentioned, council was provided a memorandum from the department late last week. A copy of that memorandum was provided in the packet for tonight as well. The memorandum specifically talked about the question in regards to the inclusion of case numbers with searches. And I'll speak to that a little bit more tonight and some changes that are being made. There was also some question regarding the criteria that's used to evaluate outside agency searches and reasons for revocation of their access. That one I'll touch on as well when I speak more specifically about the changes in the audit process. There were some questions regarding the previous searches that were conducted with Homeland Security or HSI identified as the reason, so we touched on that. the question regarding the convoy searches and why none of those were specifically included. And then we also provided some comparison of Thornton to other agencies that are currently using Flock, to include the number of cameras that other jurisdictions are using in comparison to the city of Thornton, and a look at that comparison to population and size of jurisdiction. And then also touched on the question regarding the CGIS requirements for ALPR systems and the concern regarding MFA. I think it's important to know that our city IT department is currently doing a full cybersecurity review of Flock and that system from all different directions. Flock has been extremely cooperative in that process. The IT director is here as well, if needed, to speak to that a little bit more. That we are waiting on a few of our questions to be answered and finalized before we are completely comfortable with Flock from a security perspective. But to date, I can tell you that there have been no red flags of any kind that have been brought to my attention. But jump into the audit process. So as a reminder, in February, when we first went through this, I had talked about the mandatory offense drop-down box that Flock had added to the system. We looked at that as desirable in that it would require officers to identify an actual crime or legitimate law enforcement reason for the purpose of their search. At that time, audits were also only being completed by one system administrator, which was myself, and the goal was to complete at least one audit per month. Changes to the audit process that we are looking to implement. First and foremost, in regards to the mandatory boxes and the use of case numbers or call for service numbers, it is our intent to make the second reason box, which has previously been just a free text box, a mandatory box that would actually be another drop-down box. If you recall from the first presentation, we've identified that the three primary uses of this system are to support calls for service, case investigations, or to do some additional searches related to the alerts that come through the system. By making these mandatory, what we believe we're doing is, from the audit perspective, we should start seeing significantly more case numbers and call for service numbers included with the searches. And if they're not included, it'll stand out like a red flag during the audit process. I've also discovered that should a search be completed for an alert, I can search against the alert page to verify that that license plate number actually did provide an alert to the system. So giving us the ability to audit the internal use of the system that much more specifically. We're also going to start conducting the audits once a week, and we'll be adding additional employees for a total of 5 who will have the ability to conduct those audits. The other 4 employees that are going to be added to this, they currently conduct other audits on systems within our organization, and we do not believe that adding this to what they're doing currently will be burdensome in any way, but give us the opportunity to pay much closer attention to the use of this system. The other thing that we're going to implement is an actual audit log to record the audits that are conducted, capturing at bare minimum the audit date, the date and time frame of the audit, whether or not there were concerns found, and what were the results of those concerns through investigation and how were they addressed. And then also include who it was that specifically completed that audit at that time. Additionally, we will have the ability, because the audit is downloadable as an Excel spreadsheet, we'll have the ability to very easily see the total number of searches that any individual officer is conducting. We'll be able to compare days of the week for those searches against the officer's known work schedule. We'll obviously evaluate the reasons and have that additional mandatory drop-down box to give us something else more specifically to look at. Continue to audit for overall compliance with state law and department policy. Any issues that are identified will be investigated and, as noted earlier, documented in the audit log. It's, I think, important to note that to date, we have not found any evidence of misuse by department employees. When questions have come up, we have investigated those and have had those results come back favorably in that the system was being properly utilized. We will have the ability to review all searches that are conducted in the system, specifically to compare to that criteria of whether or not a case number was used, was a call for service number included, and then look into the alerts that much closer. And as mentioned previously, City IT is currently reviewing the overall flock system and its security features.
Before you move on,
Yes.
Chris?
I appreciate all the additional work on this. You're gonna track the days of the week, but what about hours? So like if an officer worked during the day, but then in the evening is going, is that accounted for in that regard?
Yes, actually, the spreadsheet that I've designed does both. It does the day of the week specifically and the time frame in which the search was conducted. So yes, we would be able to also take a look at the time in comparison with the date itself and the day of the week.
Okay. Follow up then, can you elaborate a little bit more on the evaluation of the reasons for the search? Like, how are those evaluated or deemed accurate? I appreciate the evaluation, but could you go a little bit further into the process of that evaluation and what that actually yields?
Yes, so with the inclusion of that additional information, we will be able to take a sample of all of the searches that are completed and actually search and pull up the specific case report number to make sure that the search that was conducted and the license plate are in fact related to that specific case. Or the same we can do for a case, a call for service number. We can go back, pull up that call for service number, read the facts and the details of that call for service, and verify that the search that was conducted matches the information that was provided in that call card, and that search specifically in what they entered in makes sense compared to the information provided. And then with the audits, or I'm sorry, the alerts, that one will be easy in that we'll be able to search that specific license plate because alerts alert to specific plate numbers. We'll be able to go back and search and verify, yes, this license plate in fact alerted to the system, and therefore the search conducted additionally makes sense.
Thank you.
When it comes to the external audit, we will continue to focus, as we have in the past, on compliance with state law, very specifically searches related to immigration or legally protected healthcare, and whether or not any of those are included in the other section. And I'll speak to that a little bit more here in a second. Also, we're also reviewing for compliance with department policy. And specifically, what we will have the ability to do is look at all of the searches that used other as a reason. And we will look at those specifically for any very obvious vagueness. And usually What an example of that would be is it'll just be other and no additional information. It may be other and just LE and give me no indication as to why the search was actually conducted. So anytime the other is used, we'll look at every single one of those. And if we find anything that's concerning, that will result in an automatic revocation of that agency's access to our system. And then we will also do a random sample of these searches and look at those closer, specifically looking for, did they include any additional reason? Is there any indication that those were searches completed in regards to immigration or legally protected healthcare? Unfortunately, obviously, with the external audit, there is no way for us to completely verify those searches to the same level that we can the internal searches. Because there's not as much detail provided in those that we won't be able to verify those to the same degree as we will the internal searches.
What type of number are you, I mean, you guys did a 500% increase on the staffing there, but with these external searches and things, like what type of numbers are we still talking about for these 5 to include yourself to audit?
To be able to audit.
Yeah,
So we haven't identified the specific number. Part of what will be determined will be once the team as a whole starts getting into these and doing these audits on a regular basis, I think we'll have a much better idea as to what that sample would contain and how many of those we would actually look at very specifically. We haven't identified that number yet and what that's going to be exactly, but having been doing these for a number of months now, I feel comfortable that we will be able to, hopefully anyways, find anything that is obviously immigration related, HSI related, those types of things, because we can also search for those type of keywords to see if those hit. And usually that's always been part of my process. Is there anything very specific to immigration, abortion, things like that? So we'll focus in as best as we can on the stuff that ties to state law and what is prohibited specifically in the state of Colorado. What that number is exactly, I don't know for sure at this time.
Justin?
What is the timeline on training these new employees to conduct the audits?
This is something that won't take very long at all. My desire was to get through this to see if there was anything additional council wanted to include for our consideration. And once we're comfortable with this is what the audit process is going to look like, we will start rolling that out. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have that in place, you know, within a couple of weeks, depending on schedules for these employees that I haven't looked at specifically.
What does the training look like?
So what my the plan is to as a group go through and actually show them what we are looking for when it comes to the audit process. So basically walk through an audit step by step with these individuals so that they know what it is that we're looking to accomplish, how to do it. And I suspect they may even have some suggestions that haven't come up yet on ways that we may even fine tune this a little bit. But ultimately, we're going to walk through this process step by step to make sure everybody has an understanding of what it is we're looking to accomplish, and then also provide them some written guidance as to basically, here are the things you need to check off every time you do this audit. Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this?
Okay. Does Flock offer any products or services that consist with the audit process? Like, it seems like a great way to leverage AI tools, and you know, Flock being a tech company, seems like they might be able to.
Yes, that was actually my next slide. We'll roll right into that. Thank you. So I think I forgot to mention this at the February meeting. We were made aware of this late last year that Flock was actually looking to develop a tool within the system that would run by itself and proactively check the system and alert administrators in real time to any unusual or suspicious search activity. I don't know exactly when they plan on rolling that out, but they have, as late as last week, stood by the fact that this is in testing currently, and they anticipate rolling this out sometime this year to agencies to assist us in this auditing process. And unfortunately, I have no idea what that looks like. I think anything will be helpful and beneficial to us. We'll just have to obviously wait and see what that is. There was a question regarding some comparison of the LPR systems with other vendors. We specifically looked at Motorola and Axon. We've heard a lot of good things about their systems throughout the country. So we took some time and met with them. Ultimately, all three of these systems very much work the same way. There aren't any features within any one of them that makes one stand out significantly more than other. All tell us that they follow CJIS compliancy. Surprisingly, all of them have MFA as an option controlled by the agency itself, which I was surprised to find. The biggest difference with Flock is when it comes to national and statewide searches, or the ability to network nationally and statewide, they have basically a box that you can check to say, okay, we want to share nationally or statewide and allow agencies who are conducting searches of very specific license plates to search against our network. The other two vendors limit it to one-to-one agreements. So we would have the ability through those to share with any agency within the country, but it would require us to specifically send a request through the system to them asking permission to share. If it's approved, then we have that ability similar to what we're doing now within Flock. I think one of the bigger drawbacks in my mind with the Motorola system is that the installation of those cameras would specifically fall on the agency. And I would see that as being burdensome to the organization, because we would have to at least identify an employee who would be trained in how to do that. That then results in us handling permitting for the placement of those cameras, and then it would also require us to coordinate with other city departments to have access and the ability to utilize a boom box to get up to a pole to install these. So significantly more work would fall on the agency through the Motorola system.
Justin?
Sorry.
I'm looking at the table and it says under review for Flock. Is that referring to the review that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, correct. Yeah, we obviously know that they have told us that they are CJIS compliant, but we are obviously doing a full review of that to confirm that with the help of our IT department.
Gotcha.
And then this is obviously separate from the LPR conversation, but the question came up at the February meeting looking for some additional information to Flock's audio detection system. Worth mentioning that even though as a department we're familiar with this, we're currently not recommending this technology as a priority. However, some of the features of this system are significantly different than other systems that I'm aware of. Most systems focus specifically on gunshot detection and gunshot detection alone. Flock has actually expanded upon that to include slideshow detection, which is basically your street racers, your vehicles that are doing burnouts, loud revving engines, the ability to detect those. The ability to detect crash detection and collisions associated with accidents that may have severe injuries. The ability to detect distress, calls for help, cries for help, things of that nature, screams. And then also the ability to distinguish between fireworks and gunfire. And then ultimately, the system uses triangulation to try to help determine where that's coming from to give us some place to respond to start looking for these things if we hadn't received a call for service. 100% citywide coverage using the flock safety audio detection system, which they refer to as the Raven system, would cost us an estimated $1.3 million. Again, as you're aware, there's currently a public safety technology team. We're in the process of putting together a public safety technology action plan. This is something that is on that list, but again, not a priority from the department's perspective. And if we were to go in this direction, our recommendation would be that we utilize call for service data and use that information to roll the system out in stages and specifically focus on areas where we're getting a majority or more calls for service that are pertaining to gunfire and things of that nature. Would be how we would go about recommending rolling that out if we were to go in that direction. I'll turn this part over to Kai.
Yeah, so obviously we recognize the importance of transparency. We know that building trust definitely takes time, and we're always working to build that trust. We're always willing to evolve to meet the needs of our community because those are constantly changing. So I think that's a big foundation of this discussion. We did, as a follow-up to our February meeting, update our LPR page on our website, and that's under transparency and cameras and technology. I think we've shared this with some of you that we're going to be migrating our website to a new site soon. So it's looking a little bit different right now. It's under construction a little bit, but you can still find this under cameras and technology. And we expanded that FAQ section to include questions that we received at our February meeting, as well as questions that we've seen come up over time with community members. And so that has been expanded. We added the presentation materials from our February meeting. So there's a link to the video from that last meeting, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, just so that the community can easily find it. They don't have to dig through previous council meeting information. And then, as we discussed last time as well, we did launch an online question form for additional community feedback. So that's been live since beginning of March, and we shared that information across our social media on March 10th, just letting our audience online know. Did you know we recently shared information about how we use this system and this type of technology? Here's a link. If you have further questions, please submit your forms and we'll add to our FAQ as we can, as those come in. And then that was also pushed out through our weekly briefing e-newsletter, and that was distributed on March 11th. And some of the engagement we've seen as of April 1st on that webpage, we've had 675 total visits. 487 of those came in starting in February. So when that discussion was really starting with you all. And then social media reach, over 15,800 views on Facebook. That is almost 10,500 individuals reached, 16 link clicks from there. And then on our other combined platforms, over 4,500 impressions. Newsletter goes to over 3,100 people. That one was opened by over 1,300 with 6 link clicks. So far on that question form, we have not received any additional questions. Chris?
2 things. Could you provide an update on whether or not there's been some consideration to doing just like a community type meeting on this, like ALPRs, and where, yes, we have members of the community that are here, and it's a little bit more of a task orientation to go online and do things. So have we come to a decision yet of let's just do a community meeting on discussing the technology, how it benefits the community, maybe some of the hurdles, and there's a lot of great information on updates and what you guys are able to take from the last meeting to now. So are we at that point now, or do we see that in the near future where, we can really just test it with live residents in person, being able to participate outside of our planning sessions?
I think we're definitely further than we were at the last meeting. I think the balancing act, as we talked about before, is just trying to avoid a policy related debate with the community. But I think from a presentation standpoint and being able to field questions, I think we are at the point where we could find some type of forum to do that with maybe one of our existing upcoming engagement pieces. Maybe not as a standalone, but as one of the many topics that we're talking about. But that's the inherent tension in that is what we talked about last time. So I think that issue would still be present. We just have to find a way to kind of thread that needle, Councilmember.
So inching closer, but just not ready yet.
I think not yet, yes.
Okay. And then my second piece was last time I was on the website, and I brought this up last meeting as well. Seems like I know it's a testimonial, but the flock video that was on there, my thoughts or suggestions being around, can we give it Todd and do our own comms video or something that is more personable? It's about Thornton. We have our own success stories that brings it closer to home. And the real just issue with that again is we do so many different services for the city, but yet we don't promote specific companies with their own production or own produced video content. So, to alleviate that, what if we did our own versus utilizing theirs? Where then I don't see why, we don't have numerous companies all over our website that provide vital services to our residents. It seems almost like we've chosen this one and it's the only one allowed on our robust city page. How do we steer away from that so it doesn't look like they're getting an edge where we don't offer that to various other companies that provide services?
We can definitely look at that. Yeah. That I don't really have an issue with that. I don't know that we did the follow-up. We committed to look at the website as a whole to see if there are other examples of that. So I'm not clear on that piece of it, but that's frankly not a heavy lift. I'm sure we should make that happen if that's.
Well, the ultimate goal is to continue to build the trust, and it's something that's constantly in the headlines, and you see the surrounding cities all having the same conversations. And I think the efforts on our end need to be focused more intentful in terms of, they are a partner of ours, but they're not getting kind of special treatment. So how do we separate that so that we can get more community buy-in, community trust, and perhaps then not having a very specific produced video from the company that's the partner would build that trust. And I know you guys are working very hard on that, so that's why I'm bringing these suggestions forward, so that a little separation sometimes is good. And then the system is the system, whether it's Axon, Motorola, or Flock. We've seen technological advances with internet, social media, cell phones. Like, it's here. You go to Europe, there's cameras everywhere. We understand that. But perhaps the vagueness in the beginning made for a rocky start. So how do we capture some of that buy-in again? And I think a little separation, then knowing that there's various partners might present that better.
Fair request.
Garish?
Where did you come up with the figures for the Axon cost?
From Axon themselves, they provided that to me.
Because from what I understand, it was only $3,000 a camera.
I can't speak to what agreement they came to with Denver, but that is what they provided to me as a quote per camera here. So
one of the things that's unique about Axon is that they have such a heavy presence in law enforcement technology in general that a lot of times what you'll see is they kind of roll in a lot of their products. And so there could be a reduced pricing because they have LPRs in their cars and their video cameras. They have their Fusus real-time crime center. So theirs isn't quite as easy to pick apart. It's not siloed like the others are. So that might be one explanation to Councilmember.
and I also do know that when they quoted us, they also looked at it from the perspective that we would need to utilize their pole for each of those installations, so that does add cost. Whereas if we are able to identify locations and utilize an existing pole, then the cost is not as expensive. Plus, Axon actually provides a couple different cameras for LPR purposes. I asked them specifically for a quote on the system that's closest to Flock and how Flock works, and is solar powered. They do also offer a system that is plugs into AC powered directly. So that may also account for differences in price.
Also, when somebody submits a question, how are you on about answering?
We haven't had any questions come in yet, but it comes into the PIO email address. And then based off that question, we take a look at what's available on our website, if our FAQs already address that question, things like that. And then we'd probably go from there to figure out the best way to address it.
So you would just revert that back to the page that's already out there.
If it hasn't been answered yet, we would add that question to the FAQ so that it's publicly available to everyone. And then we'd probably send them a response letting them know this has been added to our FAQ section.
As to next steps, just so you're aware, our current Flock contract is set to expire on June 3rd of this year. The renewal costs for this system is currently in the department's 2026 operational budget, and therefore would not specifically require council's approval to renew. The department does currently plan on renewing this service, but as with any service that we utilize, we will continually evaluate the system and its usefulness as a public safety technology. Should we choose to move away from this system, the contract requirement is that we would need to provide 30 days notice prior to cancellation.
Chris?
How long is the renewal for the contract in terms of 1, 3 years? What is typical?
1 year. Yep. We've been doing 1-year contracts with them ever since we started.
Justin?
Yeah, a couple questions. So in the memo, I recall seeing some statement that says that when you compare Flock and Thornton with other law enforcement agencies, that 3 of the 10 surveyed agencies require a case number or a call for service. And did in that survey, did you find out if that policy was obstructing their ability to investigate?
There was no indication that it was obstructing them in any way. There was nothing in the conversation that would lead us to believe that it was an obstruction necessarily. But they have also had that as part of their requirement from the beginning. So they couldn't answer it from the same perspective that we were answering it from. And that being said, I think with our addition of that secondary requirement, we will start to see more case numbers and call for service numbers utilized. We did not specifically ask them, however, how they handled the the alert searches. That, from our perspective, is the area specifically that would be complicated should we require a call for service number or a case number. What it would require another step, it would require our dispatchers to create a card. It creates more work from our perspective that we would like to avoid.
Maybe talk through what an alert, what that would look like.
Yeah, so the alerts are the system notifying us that a vehicle with a license plate that has been entered into CCIC, NCIC as a vehicle of interest. So for example, a vehicle that's wanted by another agency for investigative purposes. What happens now from a lot of our users is once they get that alert, they look at it, they take note of the license plate, and then they search that license plate further to see if there have been other hits on our system by that vehicle. And otherwise, has that vehicle specifically passed other Thornton cameras? Is there a camera that it passes more frequently than others? All with the intent of giving us a more defined area to start looking for that specific vehicle versus just the camera that it hit on. It may just be traveling by. And as I explained in the February meeting, once it passes that camera, we don't know where it's gone. It can travel anywhere within our city and essentially never pass another flock camera. So they will look at it for patterns, or is there a specific area where that vehicle has crossed into our jurisdiction on a regular basis? And therefore, that's because that vehicle belongs in that specific general area within the city, and gives us the ability then to drive those areas and see if we can find it. And we have had some successes with that, with stolen vehicles, and I've some stories that have been shared with me. They search that plate further, find that it frequents a general area or passes a camera on a regular basis. And then we've had luck where officers will drive those streets in nearby area and have had success in locating and recovering those cars. So in those circumstances specifically, there wouldn't be a call for service number. There would not be a case report number that currently exists that they could plug in to that specific search.
That's partially because the actual investigation belongs to another agency. We're just getting alerted that the vehicle's.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know how the other three agencies handle that. I mean, you've identified that they do require a case number to some extent. So is that similar to what you just described, or is it a one strict policy? If it's a more strict policy, what that tells me is that other agencies have figured out a way to operate with these cameras while requiring a case number or a call for service. And in the memo, you mentioned how detrimental that would be. Well, if other agencies are able to do that, then surely there's a way for us to do that as well. We just would need to learn how that process goes.
Yeah, I would certainly have to follow up with those agencies and ask some very specific questions to see how they're utilizing that and to potentially see if there are limitations. Then are they not using the system to the same degree that we are because of that limitation? But that would require, yes, some additional follow-up and specific questions.
Okay, well then I would like to, request that you would do that and report back to the council, because that's very, I think it's very important to uncover all these stones.
Absolutely.
We're taking notes of the questions just as in prior meetings.
Devin?
Thank you for the presentation. As always, it's really important for council to have data, and you guys have been really transparent with providing that to us and giving it to us whenever we ask for it. So I have a few questions. Based on what we've seen so far, how would you characterize Flock's impact? Has it been effective in supporting investigations and public safety outcomes in the area? And do you see any holes currently in the city that need to be filled relatively soon?
We have had a lot of success with the use of this system specifically. As you may recall, in the February meeting, we shared some of our successes. And I know on our website, we also include a number of our successes as they continue to occur. The most recent one that I can think of was the traffic fatality on Huron not too long ago. I can also recall another missing endangered adult success story that we've had. So yes, very much believe that it has been extremely helpful to us as an agency from a public safety perspective. And yes, if given the opportunity, we have discussed that we would like to expand the use of this system, specifically more deployment of these cameras up north. We have a lot of ingresses that are not covered. And ultimately, our desire from the very beginning with this system was to try to create basically a digital a barrier, if you will, to the city of Thornton to allow us another tool to help protect our citizens. So yes, there are definitely holes, if you will, I believe in our jurisdiction that could utilize this system, should we have the ability to expand it.
Good. To follow up on Councilman Martinez's question, one of the things that is currently ability for our system is that we can do a search without putting the case number in. But based on your audit slide, it looks like that would be considered a red flag when you're actually going through and doing auditing.
Correct, yeah. So if somebody selects that they utilize the system for a call for service or a case investigation, if it does not include one of those numbers, then it is easily identified as a red flag to us and something that would require some additional follow-up and investigation.
Sure. I guess my last question really then is more towards council. It's you know, we've gotten increased audit trails, we've gotten no sharing with other outside agencies, we've gotten individual officer tracking to make sure that officers aren't being in there. There's no sound detection being done. Are there any concerns that we haven't pressed on to ask from the department? Because I feel like we've checked every box that there's been asked of at this point. So a follow-up doesn't really seem necessary in my opinion.
Chris, you want to respond to that? I know John's pressed his button, but we'll come back to him for.
Chris can go first.
You go back, there was the slide with the chart that was doing a comparison of the different service providers. So really the most significant or at least noticeable change here would be that Flock does the nationwide or the national network. My question around that is why, or what are some of the more significant benefits to that? What makes it important and beneficial to our city? Because I trust our city. It's like any organization, there's bad actors. So when we open it up nationally, then we just allow or invite, more of those bad actors and those opportunities. So could you touch base on some of the nationwide importance and benefits of, where that really benefits Thornton?
Absolutely. So first, we currently do not utilize the national search as Flock intended. We have not checked that box, if you will, for nationwide searching. We are now using the system as a one-to-one agency agreement where they request, we would review it, and if we haven't previously revoked them, we can grant them access. We haven't been approving any agencies over the last couple months because we obviously wanted to get through this process. So we are using the system similar to how we would have to use the system with Motorola and Axon versus the statewide. And what is beneficial there is, from our perspective, obviously every agency within the state of Colorado has the same laws that apply to it, should be following the same guidance that's been provided from the state level as to how we utilize these systems or how we are not allowed to use these systems. So I feel very comfortable with that in allowing other jurisdictions within the state to conduct a search of a specific license plate that touches our system. Not as comfortable from the national perspective, so that's why we don't have that box checked, and we require an agency to specifically reach out to us and ask for permission to use it or to share information back and forth with one another and the ability to search against each other's systems. We have had some successes, and I don't know if I got into these in February or not. We had a situation with a missing endangered that ultimately left the state of Colorado and then hit on Flock cameras in Nevada that helped us lead to being able to make a phone call to an agency and working through, hey, we noticed that this hit in your jurisdiction. Ultimately, that person was recovered in that state, or located, I should say, in that state. And ultimately, everything checked out, was good. And there wasn't the concern that the reporting parties had on the front end in regards to them not being where they thought they should be. But the fact that we were sharing with that agency in another state was helpful in locating that individual. We also had utilized, this also became extremely helpful to us with a individual who we were investigating and had good charges on for sexual assault that occurred in our jurisdiction. The suspect had fled the state of Colorado. We had no idea where they had gone. We couldn't find them. Ultimately, that vehicle hit on flock cameras in Florida, and having that information allowed us to kind of focus in on our searches, and we were able to identify some associates in Florida that the suspect had ties to, and ultimately that agency found that suspect and took them into custody on the warrant that we had out for their arrest. There was another one with a homicide out of California where it was beneficial in giving us an idea as to where to start looking for that suspect. So we have had some successes at the national level with jurisdictions outside of Colorado. It's most certainly not as frequent, however, as it is within the state of Colorado. The majority of our successes very much are within the state of Colorado, neighboring jurisdictions, things of that nature. But we have had those few success stories outside the state where we felt that being able to do that is still beneficial.
John?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Excellent presentation. Thank you again. So about 2 weeks ago, I had the honor of meeting the city attorney of Aurora, Peter Schulte. Had an informal conversation about some things, and Flock came up, and I asked my concerns about data breaches, and he says that Flock can be sued by them. So before I ask my question, the biggest concern, talking to neighbors, since I've been elected to council concerning Flock, are the data breaches and the weaponization of Flock against marginalized communities nationwide, not to mention the increased utilization of surveillance, right? So I emailed Tansy and Tammy earlier today, and then Adam was in the string as well. So my question is, what liability protections do we have in place as a city if there is a Flock data breach, which is unbeknownst to the city and Thornton PD? And then Adam, if you want to
Sure.
reply. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but yeah.
Thank you, council member. Yeah, as indicated in our response, the city's agreement with Flock is set forth in the terms and conditions document that was signed back in 2023. And that document, among other things, requires Flock to carry an insurance and add the city as an additional insured. So we would, if there was a data breach and there was a lawsuit that followed from that, we would tender our defense to the insurance company as an additional insured. In addition, because we're a governmental agency, subdivision, we have protection under the Colorado Government Immunities Act. And so we would have additional defenses that Flock would not have. So that is how I would respond to those protections.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, Drew, then Dan.
I'll just follow up on his.
Oh,
Flock has to disclose any breaches that come through as well too, so.
Drew?
What were I didn't see it, what were the 3 agencies that require the case numbers?
I don't know them off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look in my notes to see which ones they were specific. I didn't add the specific names of those agencies in the memorandum itself, just summarized it.
Great, thanks.
Justin?
Yeah, I do want to say thank you for all the hard work that you and your team have put in, and I know that I've given you a lot of work with all the questions, and so, it's not just coming from me, it's coming from the people I represent in Ward 1 and throughout the whole city. They're coming out, there's many people here, and I do want to respect their concerns. So I do thank you for the work, and I think that you have clarified a lot of the questions. The one area where I'm still a bit concerned about is really we have not provided a venue yet for the public to come in and address the council directly around these issues. And I totally understand that it is not the role of the police department to be in the middle of a policy debate. That's the role of the council. And so my question actually is to our city attorney about what options we have specifically regarding this upcoming contract renewal and to give a venue for our residents to come in in a formal official way to address the council and to allow the council to have an appropriate policy discussion after hearing the public. How can we do that?
Well, I mean, a decision to have a community meeting on a topic is with council. There are not any real legal issues. Council can conduct such meetings as it deems appropriate.
Are there other venues, like perhaps a public hearing regarding the renewal of the contract that could happen?
The renewal of the contract doesn't require public.
Oh, I know it doesn't require one, but if the council asks for one, we could have one. Is that right?
Well, also, I think because of the cost, I'm not sure, but I don't think it even comes back to city council for approval. It's already been appropriated by city council, the funding for this contract. So, but if council directed us to bring the contract back, directed, to have public comment on that agenda item, it could happen.
So that was my question.
Yeah.
So if we directed that, then we could schedule that and provide that venue in a real official capacity.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely something I'm interested in doing. Because I think that it's only fair to our residents to give them a voice when it comes to these issues. And we've repeatedly had these discussions, but we have not allowed them to speak to us in a way that we do many other decisions that we make. So,
and at the basis, the charter, requires council to have certain public meetings. And that's why these meetings typically suffice for giving the public access, both your regular meeting where public comment is allowed and scheduling agenda items at your updates.
Yeah, and I'd say that, normally that's the case, but I think we've had an extraordinary amount of public interest in this particular topic that it warrants its own agenda item where we could discuss this in a way. And I think that we certainly have the opportunity as a council to provide that voice, and I'd love to see that happen. I know we'd be probably hearing the same thing that we've heard here, but the important thing is to create a space, carve out a space specifically for this, for the many, many residents who've reached out asking for this. So I think that would be a good thing to consider as a council, is giving that direction. I think we have the time to do it as well.
Devin, you hit your button next.
I'm very confused by that because this isn't a policy, this is a tool. Chief, did we come to you guys and ask you what kind of body camera you should be using and get approval for that?
No, sir.
This is getting to a redundancy where it just doesn't make any sense in this sense. We don't ask our city attorney what database she uses to store the case files in. We don't ask the city manager what desktop database she's using to store financials in. We leave it at the discretion of our chief and our city manager to make the decisions around the tools that we need to make sure that our safety and police departments are able to effectively do their job. We're definitely listening to what the citizens have asked. They've pushed back. They've told us that they want audit trails. We have audit trails in place now. They don't want sound and video recording. We don't do either one of those things. We have individual officer auditing. I think every box that's being checked has been checked off efficiently and at the request of what the citizens have asked for. I think asking for a meeting around a policy is redundant because this isn't a policy. This is just a tool that we're using in our city.
We have Chris and Roberta.
So
Follow up to that, and while I do agree with you in the examples that you're utilizing, what is unique in this situation, this topic is unique, and you'll see, you know, with longer tenure on council, it's very, very rare that we have this much engagement over specific issues. So I think that's what deems or makes this discussion happen more frequent, more redundant, is because, you know, we've utilized tools like this for a few years now, but it wasn't until recent that information came to light and the public engagement started. Then I'm sure you get emails, but we get a lot of emails about it. So really, I think the purpose or the reasoning behind it is to satisfy the questions, requests, and desires of the community. No, they don't care what computers we use or what body cams, but there weren't data issues and things like that that have risen before.
I would argue that point.
Well, to this degree where it's constantly in the headlines and we're having repetitive meetings discussing it. So, you know, just from my 3 years on council, you can kind of tell which discussion topics have a lot more presence of the public and inquiries of the public. And that's why we just want to make it more available, answer the questions. Because even since February, you guys have done an excellent job. There were a lot of questions and a lot of things that they made recommendations to implement. And we're seeing that progress. So I don't want to just close the book and say, hey, it's none of your business. You know, we're going to use whatever tools. I think it's getting better because of those questions and because of the discussions. And I feel like that's just really important as we sit in these chairs as a council member, when the community gets concerned about something, even though it's not our usual business, that we do make space for those concerns and hear those questions. So I'm not entirely opposed to it, but a piece that I have really enjoyed is the community questions in comments, particularly because I'm not the smartest man in this room. I mean, my wife says I'm a know-it-all, but aside from her, you know, realistically, I have learned a lot because I don't even know the right questions to ask. You're somewhat in this space, so you have a good base education, and it makes you confident in whatever decisions we make. So I think that's been beneficial. I think it's been important that, you know, residents that know more or have specific questions that I can't even think of, you know, we get those answered, and if we satisfy it, then at some point, yeah, we can close this book. But it's really just the heightened attention that this has gotten and seen that is unlike 98% of the other things that we've discussed on council in my 3 years. So I don't want to just sweep it under the rug to some degree and say, hey, we've answered the questions, let's just move on. And it's not really something the council usually discusses to this degree, but we're here, we're in the moment, the questions the community are asking, so we address it now just because that's what we should do. So, and that's the big motivation for me personally. Yeah, I know each of us probably have our own positions or motivations around it, but for me, that's been rewarding. That lets me sleep better at night knowing that the council or that the residents have peace of mind because they felt heard and got things answered. And for us, it's just facilitating. You know,
I concur with
time.
My point of the matter is that we've had numerous meetings on this now. We've had community outreach. We have lots of community members who are sitting here now. The questions that have been brought up have been around making sure we're not communicating with the federal government on immigration, making sure we have audit trails in place to be able to watch after, make sure it's not being misused, mishandled. Concerns about data breaches. And that one, to me, hits home for all of it too, because I feel that way about all of it. But that goes across all software. But I think that out of every question that has been posed, specifically up until the point of the last meeting that we had, all of those things look like, to me, from my opinion and some of the others, we've checked those boxes. We went through and looked through all those. We went through all that data. The team has reevaluated their processes on how they're doing things. I think that we're prolonging something or just trying to keep things moving just because it's a wheel that we want to keep kind of rolling. But all the questions at this point that have been asked and asked several times in different paraphrase situations have come up with the same responses that, yes, we are taking care of that. We're monitoring those situations. We're changing processes and addressing the concerns that are there. So to me, it just feels like a redundancy to have to try to come back to this again when we don't do this for any other tools. If we start looking at the concerns of privacy and the concerns of things that are there, the body cameras that police officers wear are way more advanced than anything that this flock camera is doing. But there's not a heightened thing around that because as a general principle, the public knows that that's gonna be more helpful than hurtful. And by changing our system over from Flock to Axon, is it really changing anything other than the name that's on the camera?
I wouldn't know, but I don't disagree again entirely with all of your statements. We've made this progress because of those questions and community engagement and the audits and stuff that all arose because we used this for years without any of that progress being made because there was no attention to it. So, you know, a big piece for me would be that community meeting. And I know that you guys said that we're inching closer to it, but if that's the final chapter of the book, then hey, anybody and everybody that has those questions, this is your last opportunity instead of the council fielding these or the emails. You know, perhaps that could be the final chapter then, and it's not, you know, another one of the council discussions. Because that is the one thing that I do hear pretty consistent is like, can we have some of that FaceTime and just put a bow tie on any loose ends and questions, and then, you know, maybe at
So
that
my
point, then yes.
pushback on
we
that
do.
is that they've already said that they've gotten 0 questions in.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was out there though. I literally, my Instagram was uninstalled from my iPhone because I wasn't on there for, I don't know, 2 weeks or whatever it was. So I know there's a lot of people and maybe, and it's not to put any individual in a corner, but could be older residents, could be idiots like me that just, I try to stay off social because I have too much to do each day. So literally my phone uninstalled it for me. So I missed that. And I know you're doing a great job and we talked a little at the award ceremony and things. So there's 150,000 plus residents here. There's no way we're reaching it all because I missed that. And I tend to do a good job.
But
of
we do know we reached 15,000 and got no questions.
impressions, yeah, but I mean, that could be kids, that
All
could be
right,
people.
we're gonna move on to the next, we have Roberta and Dustin who've also pressed their buttons. Roberta?
Well, John and I had a meeting a couple weeks ago, or two. We had a pretty good list of questions here. Some of them, you know, just looking at kind of like what we're talking about tonight, and the questions kind of could be grouped up into different, kind of like the same question asked a few different times. But one thing that stood out to me in the meeting was I had just point blank asked the question if folks wanted to just get rid of cameras. And a lot of the people that have been engaged in this conversation raised their hand to yes, I want to get rid of the cameras. And then one question that resonates with me on this, or one comment that was made that resonates with me, is people asking if the benefit outweighs the cost. And so a lot of the conversation wrapped around surveillance and like that being a value people hold and a concern people have. And I have done, you know, a lot of like, just over the last few weeks, just kind of searching online and looking at different things and perspectives, and found a really cool, by accident, a really cool interview with a really smart lady, tech lady, that was talking about the whole idea of surveillance in our country now, in the world, and all the different tech companies and all the different ways that we can be surveilled through all the means that we have, which is like our phones, our cars, all these, you know, computers, everywhere you go, you can be monitored in some way, shape, or form. And I then again think about the young man that passed away on Huron and his family, and how if this had happened 20 years ago, that family may never know who killed their kid, and they may never know, or never be able to get justice for their child, or missing elderly people, or a missing autistic child that, you know, decides to go in somebody's car. I don't know. There's so many different possibilities. And so I've said this before, I'll say it again. One child's life is worth that to me, because I don't think anybody in the city of Thornton deserves to have their children lost or stolen and, or, you know, trafficked or something, and us not have a tool to help save them. When it comes to the question around policy, I've looked a lot into that too. I did a lot of research before when I first got on council about our procurement process and what that looks like. And this was around the time when we were looking at building Fire Station 8 and what that looked like. So I sat with Brett Henry for 2 hours one day and talked about procurement and really got to understand what it means for the city to purchase things like these cameras. And I, having worked in the realm of contract enforcement and policy for a while, when you start to open a can of worms of like, let's do a different procedure for this specific type of policy, you set a precedence, and then we'll have to, I think it could lead to us having to do that for more and more things. And that's a concern of mine because we have to be able to allow our city workers to do their job and trust and know and believe that they're doing a good job. If we have a serious concern about that, I think we need to bring it to the staff that are working for us and bring it to our city manager, via the city manager to the staff to address that. I have a concern when we start to put too much of like this whole having a public hearing for this. We don't have that in our charter where we have to do that for every procurement process that we have. And I don't know that that's something that we want to do is change that practice because like Councilmember Byrd said, it could make it so that we're continuously doing that for other things too. And there are a lot of tools that our police use that are frightening. I went through the Citizens Police Academy. There's tasers, there's guns, there's really big guns, there's guns that shoot beanbags at people. We could say in the United States of America that it would be great if the police didn't have to have guns, but we live in a reality where everybody has a gun in America, and we can't send our police force out there without one. That would be horrifying. So I think that we probably need to look at what they've done as far as the work, and allow them to do that. And if we start to have issues with it, definitely take some steps to correct that. But they've done a lot of work to make sure we have, you know, the correct oversight of this program. I have lived in Thornton for over 30 years. I've seen the work you guys do, and I have not seen anything that leads me to believe that there's somewhere to mistrust anything. Obviously, if that were to change, we could look at it, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Justin?
Yeah, I think actually, I agree with Devin on a lot of points. We have heard this quite a bit. There's not a lot. I don't know if there's a whole lot to hear from our police department, but again, we have not provided a venue to hear from the residents. You know, I've gotten hundreds of emails, contacts, item of calls. It adds up to at least 100 conversations, and almost all of them have been concerned about flock and they don't want it. And I believe there's also hundreds, if not thousands, of people out there who want these tools out there, but we haven't heard from them either because we have not provided them a place to come in and address the council. Sure, they could come in and talk during meetings or in their public comment, but that's not the same thing, in my opinion. We're not carving out a space, creating it just for them. So if we don't want to do a public hearing, then we don't need to do it that way. But I think it would be wrong. We would not be doing our job properly to deny the public out there who have reached out to us over and over and over again an opportunity to come speak to us directly on this in a venue that's specifically designated for this topic. And I think regardless of whether we do this public hearing, which I think it would be the best venue or not, I think we should create that space for them. And not just for the people who are opposed to flock cameras, but I want to hear from the people that support it. I have not heard from them. They have not reached out to me because we haven't given them that space to do that. And I think if we do that deliberately, then we will have the full picture. We've heard the picture from our staff. We've heard, they've answered all our questions. They've done a great job. But we've had this disjointed ad hoc process of hearing from the public. And I think that that's because we haven't really put the full work in. And I think only after that can we move on from this topic. So that's really what I'm asking for, whether it's a public hearing or whether it's a community meeting. Something we have to do that. Otherwise, we're turning our backs on the public. We're saying, well, we don't need to hear from you directly. Just send us an email. I don't think that's right.
I would counter that as well, because Roberta just said they had a Ward 2 meeting and this was a topic that came up. We hold meetings with our constituents regularly. When Drew and I had coffee with residents, Flock didn't come up as the conversation that people were wanting to talk about. That doesn't mean we didn't give them the opportunity to have that conversation with us. When we set up our meetings to be able to speak with anybody, I welcome any conversation anybody wants to have with me. But if it's not brought up, I don't know that setting a specific meeting with the intent of saying, we're gonna speak about this one individual tool is really necessary when you guys have your meetings set up to be able to run things. They have theirs that was going on. Like, we all have things that are going on where we're speaking with our constituents. It doesn't mean we're not giving anybody the opportunity to voice that opinion, on top of the fact that every single public comment we have, Flock has come up for months now, at least the entire time that I've been on council.
Others? I have not heard overwhelming support for a public hearing related to the topic for various reasons. I think the direction that staff is moving forward, unless there's an objection to that from anyone, we'll continue at that process, recognizing the request for continued community engagement. There's opportunities for your community meetings, ward meetings to also have this as a topic. It gives lots of opportunities for that public discourse. I don't think it's going to stop. I think it shouldn't stop. That's our job as council members to hear what our constituents have to say in whatever forum. And so I think that's the opportunity is there. Anything else to add? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is the McAllister Park draft master plan, unless we need a break.
We need a little bit of time to rotate staff back into the room.
All right, let's take a quick break then.
Too much time.
Yeah, okay. Park draft master plan.
So this is the culmination of a really important community-based planning effort. I'm gonna pass it off to Chris Stanky, who's gonna make a brief introduction.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Ayala and city council members. What we have here is we got Bob Keys, Deputy Director, and then we've got Kendrick Wyman, our Senior Project Manager for Parks and Open Space. He's gonna do the bulk of the presentation for this McAllister Park Master Plan. So Kendrick, have at it.
Yeah, we'll jump right into things. Well, good evening, council. Like Chris said, I'm Kendrick Wyman, Project Manager with Parks, Recreation, and Community Programs Department. I'm excited to be here tonight to provide you all with an update on the McAllister Park Master Planning process. Quick look at what we're going to be covering this evening. And we'll go ahead and just jump right into things. So I wanted to start off just with a little bit of context here to provide us all a sense of what exactly we're talking about here with McAllister Park. So McAllister Park is about 6.5 acres total in size. Sits on the other side of I-25, due west of where we're sitting here tonight at Civic Center. We think it presents really a unique opportunity over there on I-25. So what makes it a unique opportunity exactly? Well, first off, the park is already owned by the city. It's really one of the only remaining undeveloped parks left on the west side of I-25. There's also some existing infrastructure at the park that we think will support and be very beneficial for the park improvements that we're proposing. This includes a 92 space parking lot that would help support the improvements and also limit the impacts to the surrounding neighborhoods. As you can, in addition, as you can see on the slide here, McAllister Park is located and surrounded by neighborhoods that have been designated high and very high priority based on the Trust for Public Lands park prioritization map tool. This is all to say basically that we think there's going to be an outsized impact to the community by expanding and adding additional improvements out at McAllister Park. So I want to take a quick look at the park and kind of its current conditions. So this park and the parcels were purchased by the city back in 2021. There's an existing baseball field, a half basketball court, small playground for 2 to 5-year-olds, McAllister building, and that's attached to the 92 space parking lot. You can see on the west side of the park, which the city owns all the way up to Huron Street, there's about 2.5 acres of undeveloped parkland. You can also see there's some utilities on the site. We've got some cell phone towers that we're working around and also an auxiliary structure that's attached to those cell phone towers. It's a gently sloping site and has great views to the south, kind of looking right over downtown Denver, all the way to Pikes Peak on a clear day, in fact. So this project really has been driven by public engagement and public process throughout. From the very beginning, we really knew that we wanted to work with the neighborhood and residents to figure out what exactly they wanted to see out of this park. So we started off by attending the Dia de los Muertos festival back in 2024. That's actually held on site at McAllister. I'm sure plenty of you have been to that event. We did some dot voting on boards with precedent images to figure out what types of park programming residents would like to see out there. We followed that up by developing, as the design team, 2 conceptual site plans that we then presented through an online bilingual survey and also another in-person meeting held at the park where we had some good attendance. We followed that up finally earlier this year by reviewing the draft master plan. That was kind of a combination of all the feedback we had received up to that point, presented that draft master plan to the neighborhood just earlier this year in February. Some of the key takeaways from the public engagement process: we really felt like we had a good mix of park users across lots of different age groups, which was great to see. It wasn't just young or old, it was kind of everything. We also found that there was a lot of similar top amenities that residents were requesting across the different engagements. You can see the top amenities that were ranked the highest there on the screen. There was a bit of a preference for the second concept that was presented, and there was no majority in favor of replacing the baseball field that exists with a multi-use field. So let's take a look at the draft master plan. As you can see on the screen there, on the east side of the park, we're really leaving in place all of the existing park infrastructure. So the baseball field, basketball court, playground, all that stays in place, likely with some minor enhancements and improvements. To talk about some of the highlights of the proposed improvements, looking at the building, we've specifically left about a 50-foot buffer around the building on all sides and more to the west side of the building in case of any future renovations or expansion of that facility. There's a small splash pad there in the center of the park, kind of designated with that swirl. That splash pad is shown at about half the size of the existing one that's out at Carpenter Park, to give you a sense of the size. That area is also being designed to double as an outdoor classroom or small amphitheater when the water is shut off for the season. To the west of that splash pad, we have an expanded playground area. This playground area really focuses on bouldering type equipment and nature-based play equipment. We have increased shade across the site using both tree plantings and also a shade shelter there at the plaza space just to the south of the splash pad. We've got multiple accessible concrete walking loops throughout the park. We've added some nature exploration, soft surface trails, park games, and waterwise plantings spread around the perimeter. We've really tried to limit bluegrass in this design. Obviously, it's pretty thirsty stuff, so we really wanted to limit it to the most usable spaces. You can see that highlighted towards the south side of that new proposed development. We've also reserved a prominent location close to Huron Street for public art, and we hope to work with a local artist on that project. Additional enhancements, which aren't all that visible or shown on the plan, include some lighting, seating, and a split rail fence that's going to run the full length along Huron Street to separate the park area from the busy street. We're also looking at the potential to put a couple food truck hookups in the parking lot to support any community events that might happen at the park. One thing I want to point out, this particular plan does not include a plumbed restroom, which is pretty typical for a park of this size. There's obviously a significant cost with those, both upfront and ongoing maintenance from a maintenance perspective. And really, we focus those typically on regional sized parks and athletic facilities that are hosting large tournaments. We would be open to exploring a shared bathroom with the building if that were ever to be renovated and in a way that would provide that as an opportunity. We also plan to add an additional portalet in the meantime to help with the additional usage that we anticipate. Go back to that one real fast. The design team has also put together a conservative cost estimate at this point. This includes a 20% contingency, and as you can see on the screen there, the proposed improvements are coming in at a total of somewhere between $3.9 and $4.6 million. Parks Department feels like this project is really well oriented to go after grants for, and we feel pretty optimistic that we could offset total cost to the tune of about 40 to 50% for these costs. Some character images here on the screen give you a sense of kind of what we're thinking about from a material palette standpoint. So throughout the public engagement process, we heard a lot of folks saying they'd love to have more natural materials, more local materials in parks if possible. So we've really focused in on those. We also want to make sure that we're using water-wise and low water use water features in the splash pad. So you can kind of picture misters, things on timers, things with buttons, things that aren't necessarily running unless someone is actively using them. This is really going to allow park visitors to cool off during the hot summer months without wasting that precious resource. We're also looking at the potential to reuse the water that comes off the splash pad for irrigation throughout the park. And then the rest of it is just kind of looking at high quality, multi-generational type site furnishings for the rest of the park and for comfort of the visitors. Project timeline here. So we're here in spring 2026 presenting to you all. We anticipate to take the feedback from this meeting, refine it into master plan that we just presented. We will continue, like I said, to go after grant dollars for the remainder of this year. And we have earmarked dollars already set aside for construction documents. So we'll be moving into that next once we have a final draft master plan. Like I said, we do feel like this is a very highly competitive project for grant dollars. So we'll be looking at lots of different opportunities for that. We're also going to be continuing to work with our partners in the budget office and other city departments to prioritize this project within the greater CIP process for the citywide and other projects. Once funding has been secured, we'll move right into construction. That's all I've got for you. So happy to take any comments that you might have or questions, and appreciate your time.
Devin?
Couple of questions. First, thanks for this. I think this is a great addition to the city. I think that area really needs something like this to kind of help boost up the liveliness of the city and kind of give opportunity to areas around there that doesn't have those kind of build nice parks. So I think this is great. I would like to know, do we know what the added cost to the parks budget to maintain the park, if that's going to be increased at all, and what kind of difference we're looking at as far as that? The funding for that, how is that going to be aligned with the expiration of the sales tax? It will be expired about the same time this thing should be finishing up. Construction around that same time. I know we have like a levy that's in place currently that helps fund a lot of our parks for on sales tax, and how that aligns up with funding. And then two more. One is one of the slides mentioned that there's no plumb public restrooms, and you mentioned that they could be sharing with the building. Could we look at what that would cost to actually do an outdoor bathroom in addition to that as well for the citizens to be able to use while they're at the park? I think that would be a really nice added benefit for, the kids playing baseball and stuff at the park and things that were going on. And then the last question, you mentioned the food truck hookups. I'm assuming there's just gonna be 50 amp hookups will be running there. Or are we planning to make sure we keep those locked as well so that somebody doesn't decide to go charge their Tesla on it whenever they're bored?
So first question, you had talked, well, let me work backwards. The plumbed restrooms, we have looked into the cost of those restrooms. And it really depends on the size and capacity. Most of the plumb restrooms, as Kendrick had mentioned, we reserve for larger kind of regional parks or sports facilities that we are hosting large tournaments. This park, although it's an incredible development that master plan would bring to it, we just don't feel like it rises to that level of plumbed restrooms. Those, a variety of a variety of restroom options could be available besides plumbed restrooms. That's kind of an upgrade to the standard portalet that you might see out there, right? Like vault toilets. There's a lot of those options that are pretty economical. And those would help us to reduce some of the maintenance costs and that maintenance burden on a plumbed restroom facilities. A lot of our plumbed restroom facilities just they get a lot of wear. So we're looking at something that could provide a little more durability, right? And I think those vault toilets are an option, and those are anywhere from about 175,000 to 500,000, depending on the site and what kind of site prep that you need also.
Okay.
So that's an option. The question about the hookups, absolutely, those would be secured and locked when not in use for a vendor. The question regarding the maintenance, it's negligible maintenance. Right now, we're out there, you know, we have a parks worker that's assigned to that location, among other locations, but he's there, you know, a couple times a week. Would it increase his frequency in the trash? Yes, but it's a negligible impact to that operational budget. We feel like we could cover it with our existing resources and not have to detract from somewhere else. What were some of the other?
The open space tax.
Oh, the open space tax. You know, is that a potential that we that open space tax goes away? Yeah, I don't find it that likely. It's a super popular program that all the residents of Adams County support. You know, and I think there's been some discussions about extending that tax into perpetuity. I don't know where that's at. I'd have to check with our partners at Adams County and see. But definitely if that tax went away, would it have an impact, right? We are allowed 20% of our tax to go towards maintenance. So that's what our operations side would be looking to try to find a way to recover in other ways. That 20% loss from that tax. The majority of that tax that the city gets goes to our capital improvement projects.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why I asked about the restrooms too, since there's already an existing building, I didn't know if there was a way to just tie into the plumbing and stuff that was there to make it easier.
There definitely is, but I think the next presentation that we have with the feasibility study might speak to that, but we would definitely consider finding a way. Look, if the residents and you all really said, hey, look, this park deserves a plumbed restroom, we'll figure it out.
Thank you.
All right, I have Justin, then Roberta, then Drew.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really nice to see such a cool project coming up here on the west side in Ward 1. Now you mentioned the grants that you're identifying that it's coming up this summer. Do you have an idea of like, are you sources of funding like federal, state, what kind of grants are you targeting?
Yeah, specifically, we're looking at 3 different grants for this project. So the first one is with our great partners over at AdCal in the open space, of course, that we work with oftentimes. So that's a great program that we can look at and feel very confident that we could get dollars with that partnership. We're also going to be looking, because this project is well situated for it, at GOCO dollars, which is a state funded program through lottery dollars. We've had some success with them in the past. They're pretty competitive, but we do feel like this project really rises and aligns well with a lot of what they're looking for. And then finally, there's another grant through DOLA, which is the Department of Local Affairs at the state level, once again, funded primarily with gas and oil dollars, and goes back into communities where there's been extractive processes. And Adams County actually scores pretty high for those processes. So we also feel like we would rate very well for those grants. So those are the 3 that we have in mind, and we feel very confident that certainly Adams County, very likely, and then the other 2, maybe there's a 30% chance of either one of those coming.
Okay. Are any of those grants I guess, are the features of the park dependent on like some of the grants that you're going after? Like, for example, we talked, Chris and Bob, we talked previously about the Musco lighting grant that was out there for the soccer field, no longer an option anymore, but like grants in those similar veins where they're tied to specific features. Is that something that you would consider? Is that something that the grants that you're talking about, are connected to the design of the park?
None of those three particular grants are tied to any specific aspect of this park. They all go towards supporting green spaces in general, park redevelopments, acquisitions, open space in some cases, but aren't tied to specific elements, nor are there huge restrictions with any of those on how we can use those dollars. I think we'd be open to grants that maybe had a more specific use. For this one, maybe the most unique feature being the splash pad, but we could certainly look if there's any grants out there that exist to help support communities get splash pads. This is a bit of a splash pad desert, if you will. So really, if you look at, outside of Waterworld, which is a different experience because it's not public and free to access, there's really not another splash pad for about 3.5 miles in any direction. And those are both on the other side of I-25, so hard to get to for a lot of folks on the west side. So I think that'd definitely be an opportunity we'd be open to. Absolutely.
My last comment is just whatever we end up deciding on restrooms, let's just say that it's very important we have at least a portalette or something like that. Like we have a Sky Park, and that we, to Devin's point, making sure that maintenance budget is proper for that, because we've had problems with the portalette. Lots of serious problems with the portalette at Sky Park, and I think, making sure we have enough maintenance budget for that is important. Even if we can't do plumbed restrooms or whatever, we gotta have some kind of restroom there.
Absolutely.
That's it.
The park does have a portalette out there for most of the season currently, so we'd be adding one. I don't know if we've had any vandalism concerns.
We haven't at that location. It stays pretty protected where it's at, and we would anticipate the same, but I agree with you, Justin, that we would make sure we're.
Sure, yeah, vandalism, dead bodies, we're concerned about those.
Thanks.
Roberta?
Yeah.
Good job.
So I was just wondering about, you said something, what was the electrical thing you were asking about, Devin?
The 50 amp hookups,
What?
the 50 amp hookups.
Oh, okay, so that's for city?
No, it would likely be to help support food trucks that may want to come out there for community events.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, we have Dia de los Muertos, so we have some
Okay.
vendors out there. So the idea has come up because we have the parking lot once again that provides that off-street parking. If we could make that a little bit easier for them to be there, maybe not necessarily for that particular event, but for other ones that could be held at the park once it's improved, just to make it a little bit more of a draw for those types of businesses.
I was wondering if there would be electric charging stations at this park, because there's a parking lot.
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't necessarily looked at that because we're not redeveloping the parking lot itself. It hasn't been something that we've focused on, but certainly could explore that option to add a couple.
Just because I know the next part's about the building, so.
It is, yeah, and that may have gotten touched on in the feasibility report. I'm not certain, but we can certainly look at that.
Just any opportunity we can have to build that infrastructure with new buildings, it would probably be worth us looking at doing that while we're doing it rather than trying to add it later. And I feel like, as an electric car owner, I just feel like city buildings are always like the most trustworthy places to charge. Unfortunately, sometimes you go to like some of these other places and their charging stations are kind of lame, but Thornton's are always really good. And other cities I've been to have good ones at their rec centers and parks. So just something to think about with this redevelopment of this facility.
And that might be an opportunity for some of those grant specific programs that Councilmember Martinez had mentioned, that maybe that's something that we could look into.
Yeah, if we can explore it, just because it's another opportunity, and I think, they're not going anywhere. It's definitely getting to be more popular these days for obvious reasons.
Drew?
Beautiful park. Thanks for the presentation. A couple questions. The property immediately to the west, I'm just looking at Google Maps right now. It looks like it's just an empty lot with maybe a house. Do you know what the plans are for that property, if there are any?
It's owned by a development company. I don't know the name off the top of my head. I haven't seen any distinct plans for that property as of yet. I believe it's somewhat recent that they purchased it. But it is owned by by a private company, and I think they have plans to develop it somewhere down the road. We could certainly look into that.
Okay, well, I'm just curious, I'm looking at kind of just like the density around that park, and one of the concerns, maybe we can look at it when, I'm sure you're working with traffic and all that, but we didn't talk about it in the master plan is there gonna be a more substantial crossing built across Huron that will connect that neighborhood to the west, and then that potential development that'll be there on that vacant lot? There's a similar, I think there's a similar crossing just north on Huron, like it's a North Glen park, just north of 104th, and there's like a kind of a lighted crossing, and it goes to that little pond that they have for the walk around.
Yep.
Is that something that's already in the works that you expect for Huron?
Yes, we've had the initial conversations with the traffic department. There's not currently a light at that intersection of 96th
Okay.
Avenue. There is a fire station there as well. That does have a traffic signal there just to the north on Huron. But absolutely, yeah, we're looking at all those options to improve safety to get folks from the west side of Huron over to this park because, yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of the Thornton specific residents are over on that west side, and we'd like to encourage them to be able to walk to the park. It's great that we have the parking lot and they can drive there, but we want to make that as safe as possible. So, likely for a roadway of that size and speed, we would want to have a signaled intersection to make that as safe as possible, and potentially even talk about median islands. But that's we've started that discussion and haven't necessarily included that as part of this project scope.
No, that makes sense. And when you kind of look at natural walkways or how people move from one area to the other, it'd be interesting to see how that study plays out, because you might put the intersection at 96 or at the cross or at the fire station, but there might be kind of just immediate lateral movement across Huron, which you're not accomplishing the safety mission there. So yeah, it's just something that looked, I just wanted to point out. The other question on, obviously in drought stage with the splash pad and thinking about the future, or is there new technology coming out? I don't know much about splash pads that, reuses the water, so you're not having to resupply constantly and get it cut off in drought stage 2 or whatever comes next,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of 3 basic levels of water treatment you can have at a splash pad like this. So the first one is just a pass-through system. That would be water comes through, it goes through the features, goes into a drain, and goes into the sewer system, right? We'd like to avoid that if at all possible and use that resource a little bit more wisely. Once again, I think the features play into that a lot. So having, features that are constantly a fountain and spraying water up into the air all the time, you lose water through that process and also through evapotranspiration. So we'd like to avoid that with the features. The second treatment system is the one that I mentioned, where you have water come out through the features, go into a drain, into a cistern, and then can be used to irrigate the park. So that's kind of, at least you get 2 uses out of that water, or it goes back into the groundwater table. And then a third system is a recirculating system. They are obviously more expensive. There's a lot of different technology, from everything from UV to filters. The Carpenter splash pad is an example of a recirculating system. It comes with more costs up front and more costs to maintain, obviously, because those pump systems are pretty elaborate. So we're looking at all of our options. We felt like the second option, where we reuse that water if possible for irrigation, kind of found a happy middle ground. But absolutely, there are recirculating systems. For a system of this size, I think we're talking about adding on about $750,000 to $1 million for that system up front. So it does increase the cost pretty quickly. But it saves water, right? So it uses water a lot more efficiently, we also pay for that. So there's costs associated with all those decisions. Yeah.
Other questions? Any objection to the plan? Let's talk about the other stuff. The next phase.
Thank you.
Great, thank you all.
Okay, so we're gonna stay in the same location, but now shift to a different topic. So we've got Sean Sadler and Rob Kolstad coming forward. So in terms of some background as they get seated, this is a follow-up to a council request when we moved our winter weather care facility to McAllister, there was a request to look at if it was practical to also move our community connection staff that is currently off of Dorothy over to this facility. And so we did engage a third-party contractor, and we'll share some of the findings from that review.
Thanks for the introduction. So tonight, we're gonna just cover a little bit of background information. Actually, the Park Master Plan covered a little bit of it for us, so we thank them for that. Do plan on talking a little bit about the feasibility study. The full report is in your packet. We don't plan on spending much time talking about the conceptual floor plans or anything like that. They are conceptual at this point. We're happy to answer any questions. At this point, from our standpoint, this was more a test of whether this was feasible or not, and what are the kind of the trade-offs of potentially doing this. So again, happy to answer any questions, but we don't plan on spending a lot of time on office layouts and that kind of thing. And then we wanted to finish with a discussion of next steps and loop back to kind of the policy goals. As Tansy said, this discussion came up in the context of the warming center, moving the warming center operations over to the McAllister Center. We thought there might be some other policy goals that may be important to you and may lead us down a certain path. And so we did want to maybe have a little discussion about that. So that's the plan for tonight. So just a little bit of background, as you remember, this came up in the context of the warming center. A little bit of history about the McAllister Center. As you're probably aware, it was an old church that the city acquired in 2021. And at the point we acquired it, it was really about preserving access to that park. We knew that the property was bigger and that it had future potential and that there was this building, but at the time it was really about preserving access to that park and an amenity, a current amenity and the potential for a future amenity on the west side of I-25. In 2022, many of you will remember, the city entered into an agreement with the community band and the community chorus. They use, as I'm sure many of you are aware, use McAllister as a practice facility and occasionally for performances, although the band is a little limited. I don't think they can use it for their full performance because of the size of the band. But anyways, it does get used and is an important facility to them, and we'll come back to that here in a minute. In 2024, we conducted kind of a similar feasibility study about adding on to the building more on lines of a performing arts concept. And so we did text the feasibility of that and figured that, or the results of that assessment basically said that it could be done, but there would need to be significant expansion to create a performance space that would be adequate or beyond what we already have. And as you're well aware, in 2025, for the 2025 and 2026 winter, we started warming operations in McAllister, and this winter has been a particularly mild winter. We have activated it, and so we've gotten to test the facility, but I don't think test it to kind of the limits of potentially a worse winter than we've had. And then we, as you just heard, we wrapped up this year, or are in the process of wrapping up the master plan for the park. So at this point, I should mention Mark Bowers with Architectural Workshop is here. His firm helped us put together the feasibility studies here to answer any questions. They were the ones that also worked on the performing arts conceptual design, and were able to leverage a lot of the building assessment that was done as part of that assessment and really just wrap it into this work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think everybody knows Sean, the Interim Management Service Director, who's kind of PM on the project.
So as Rob mentioned, we hired Architectural Workshop, who previously worked on the Performing Arts Center feasibility study. Their mission, their scope was to evaluate the facility to be repurposed to provide office space to the community connections, code compliance, and for the permanent winter weather warming center operation, which of course just completed its first season of operations. Architectural Workshop interviewed our key personnel from those various groups to assess their operational, spatial, and functional needs. They then reviewed the current state of the facility's capacity to meet the identified needs. That began with a site assessment, including the current utility services and parking capacity. They also evaluated the building structure and its existing systems, layout, and accessibility. From those assessments, Architectural Workshop developed two conceptual plans to assess how the needs of those operations could fit and coexist within the building, with the base assumption that any reconfiguration would need to fit within the existing building footprint. Slide. As Rob mentioned, I'm not going to dive too much into the details of the specific layout. Either one of these concepts, these are both really intended to just demonstrate the plausibility of the concept, and both would require a lot of additional consideration, refinement, and design effort if a decision was made to move forward. That said, Concept A examines how the warming center, community connections, and code compliance might all fit within that space. This concept is centered around a large multi-purpose room that can be used to accommodate up to 20 people during warming center operations, while also serving as a large meeting room when not needed as a warming center. Around that, there's a reception area that can double as a warming center intake, private office spaces, storage, ADA compliant restrooms, and other typical amenities that you would see in a facility like this. In the basement, the concept also includes a large open concept work area that provides adequate workspace for all of code compliance and community connections current staff, a couple more private offices, a small break room, and some additional storage. The concept offers a very efficient use of space and is expected to allow better collaboration between the code compliance and community connection teams, but it also has some limitations. Notably, this concept is essentially maxed out and does not offer much opportunity for growth. In addition, some of community connections events and community programs may need to be hosted offsite at other facilities due to the space constraints. Finally, this space will not accommodate the needs of the band or choir that currently utilize the McAllister facility. So concept B examines the suitability of moving only community connections to McAllister facility. This concept is very similar in many ways, but has a larger multi-purpose room with a capacity of 24, more private office space, more storage, more meeting rooms, and a less crowded shared workspace. This less dense concept would likely be a bit more comfortable for staff, allows more opportunity for growth, and offers a bit more room for warming center operations. However, it does not accommodate, it still does not accommodate for the band or the choir, and also the anticipated cost is really only a small bit less than the prior concept.
So again, I mentioned, the policy goals and wanting to have a little bit of discussion around that. Obviously, when this came up, it was in the context of co-locating. What I interpreted was came up in the context of co-locating the homeless outreach team and community connections with warming center operations. But we thought there might be other considerations. The visibility of community connections and at the facility set now is kind of tucked in a neighborhood. This is out on more of an arterial, could that be benefit? Enhancing city presence west of I-25. We talked about the park not having a lot of assets west of I-25. This could be another, viewed as a potentially community asset that would be on the west side of the highway. Just more broadly, location and access to transit. I can't remember. I think there's a bus line on Huron Street. And so, a little bit better access to transit. We talked about this in services, access to services is relative, but this probably has better access to services relative to the current community connections location. One of the other considerations that we certainly have talked about is the benefit of, a future community programs department that has both kind of the community connections operations and code compliance, some benefit of co-locating those groups together and creating kind of one space. And Sean acknowledged that this space would be tight for them. And then the potential kind of on the corollary is if you were to do this, the benefit of creating kind of consolidated arts, culture, history type of programming centered around taxi,
the fire museum, and then, you know, whatever ends up being backfilled with the existing community connections facility. So those were some of the policy goals. I'll come back to this. I did want to just highlight some considerations that we're certainly thinking about as we move forward. One is capital costs. I mean, you know, you're talking 3 to 4 million. How does that compete against some of your other priorities? Service relocation is another one, not something that can't be overcome, but people get used to getting services a certain location. There would need to be a thoughtful transition to making sure that we communicate with the community. Sean mentioned a big one, programming space. You know, there some of the events that Community Connections hold would be challenging to host at this facility, and so you'd have to come up with an alternative plan at a different location or something like that in the city. Backfilling the Community Connections facility, that is a larger facility if you include the basement. And so the broader plan of that building and what we would do with that. And then the community band and the community chorus. When we met with them when we started the warming center operation over at McAllister to kind of work out some of the challenges of working around them and making sure they could still use the facility. And so they immediately asked, they knew that this was under consideration, immediately asked about, you know, hey, are we getting kicked out permanently? I said, all we were asked to do is look at this and determine the feasibility. So they're generally aware of it and certainly have interest in what we end up doing. We have not communicated with them really about the results of this or what the plan is, because we don't really know, but we would want to, you know, follow up with them and make sure that they feel like we're communicating with them and they're in the know of what's happening. So those are a few of the policy goals. I'm sure there are others. So this is our last slide. Just kind of wanted to wrap it up. So discussion and next steps. We thought those policy goals might help guide the discussion, but there certainly are. We identified 5 options. I'm sure there are others, but you know, pursue concept A. That's the community connections code and a warming center, and incorporate that in the 2027 budget and see where it lands from a priority standpoint from you all. Similarly, pursue concept B, which is just community connections and the warming center. Third option could be to consider consolidating this idea of a consolidated community programs department. Look at consolidating that into the current community connections facility into where they are now, or some alternative location. And then option 4 is we said explore a purpose-built community programs department facility at McAllister. So that's a concept, and this is really rough at this point, but that you basically would say, don't leverage the existing building, or don't look at renovating, look at kind of a built from scratch building. And we rough back of the napkins, that was in the $4.5 million range, just at a real high level. So don't quote me on that number, but from an order of magnitude, that's what we were thinking just from a planning purpose at this stage. And then obviously 5 is to do nothing. So happy to take any questions, but I'm gonna pull back to these policy goals and turn it over to y'all.
All right, I have Devin, then Roberta, and then Joe.
The 3.2 to 3.4, depending on which one of the concepts we would decide to go on, if we went with those 2. That's in addition to the 3.9 to the 4.6 for the actual park itself.
Yes, correct.
So
these are separate.
we're looking at an all-in of 8 million for the entire park, building, everything to be officially done. And I know you said you haven't reached out to the band to discuss anything about relocation ideas. Should we decide to go through this process, do we have an idea if there are any facilities that we could use to help reestablish the band so that they can relocate somewhere else?
Yeah, that'd be, again, depending on council's direction, that would be our preference, is to talk with them about their needs and what we potentially have that could work and what we couldn't. Obviously, if you are vacating the current community connections building, that's a potential that right off the bat that we had talked about. I think our initial discussions with the band is that would be a chat. You know, there's a big community room, used to be where we do senior lunches. I think that would be a challenge for them, but might possibly work. But anyways, the short answer to your question is that would be something that we'd want to explore with moving forward, depending on council's direction.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the band's been around for a very long time. I would hate for us to be like, hey, you're out, and by the way, sucks, you don't know where to go, so figure it out.
Berta?
I had the same question about the band and the choir. And then, I know there's not like a lot of details about the floor layout quite yet, but I was wondering, like, I know that there's like the computer, lab in the basement. Would there be space for like technology for people to use in the new building?
I don't think either of the designs.
The concept B, we might be able to accommodate it, but I don't know, probably not in concept A, I don't think.
I'm wondering how often it's used, because when I visited there, it's not like, I know there's things for people to check out like iPad, and you don't need to have like, if it's like laptops and iPads, you don't need to have like a computer lab set up.
Yeah. I think that'd be, again, if council wanted to pursue this, that'd be something that we need to look at in the design and figure out we know there'll be, even at this conceptual level, we know there'll be trade-offs between what we have right now and what we ultimately want. And I think that'd be part of what the design process would need to work through is, okay, what are those trade-offs? What's more important? Is it important to have this computer lab that, gets whatever use it gets, or is it more important to have this event room or this meeting room or whatever for purposes of the design?
And as far as like usage of community connections, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Because I don't get to go there like every day.
Yeah, I know that it can depend on the events. I think they get a high usage when they're hosting an event. I don't get the sense of how much foot traffic they have, but we can provide some follow-up information on that.
Okay, that's all I have right now.
Joe?
Yeah, just a couple questions. As far as the users of community connections, if we're looking at moving it to the west side of 25, is there data around like, the users of that or the visitors to community connections, they all live on the west side of 25, so it makes more sense from a usability standpoint to move it. Is there any knowledge or info that we can look into about that?
Not that I'm aware, but we can ask. I think for certain clientele, because they get entered into a HMIS database or different databases, we may have that, but I'm not sure how good a data we'll have for events that they host or whatever. So we can ask. I'm just not sure what we'll be able to get out of that.
Yeah, and again, it's like if we're moving it to the west side, it becomes more difficult to access those services, then that should be a consideration. Generally, on sense. As far as I would agree with like the band in the community chorus, they're a pretty integral part of the community, and of course we want to value and make sure arts and culture is important in music. So I would not want to move forward with anything until like there was actual plan that said we know they're going to this and they're okay with it, and then they can begin that transition before the next transition. Because I hate for them, especially during like a season when they're in this kind of middle of this weird transition where they're having able to be, and that could affect their schedule and things like that. And then I guess there was really no info about like what did we hear from code compliance and the actual hot team? Is it they were looking to be in that spot? Do they not like their current space? Is there info or feedback that's really kind of pressing? Or that's pushing them to want to go into a different space?
Well, yeah, I mean, the direction came from council to look at this, so they certainly weren't the driving force behind it. They were engaged as stakeholders through the interview process, and we got feedback on a draft of this. And if I could, I think from community connections, probably the thing that they highlighted the most for us is the ability to do programming, the space limitations of the programming, and then having to relocate and reestablish a presence in the community. From code compliance, their main point of feedback was making sure that the building is secure from an access standpoint, and that there's provisions and considerations for staff safety and security. They've got CJIS, which I don't know what is, Colorado Justice Information System, criminal justice and sensitive data that we need to make sure that is protected accordingly. So, and hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
I have Justin, then Chris, then Cherish.
Would this project be a candidate for being funded by the Parks and Open Space Fund? but the other presentation is. That's what I thought. And, given the options we have, it seems. I feel like there might be some, like, are there other options in terms of like not letting this plan just disappear and be forgotten, but also not putting that in the pipeline of 2027 budget? Like, how could this be spread out over a longer time horizon? And that's also, I'm kind of agreeing with Drew here on the not having a place in mind for the band and the chorus yet. I think there's just a lot to consider. I'm not sure that 2027 is the end all be all. So what can we do to keep this going, but not force it on the 2027 bit?
Yeah, I think that's subject to your direction. Off the top of my head, we could advance some additional design concepts if we wanted to. We could, based on council's direction, fully engage with the choir and band to look at alternatives for their programming needs. So those are a couple of things that we could do in the interim, I would think.
And the only thing, and just to be clear, when we talk about the 2027 budget process, I don't know that we actually meant that would show up in the CIP in 2027. So just so for the public, I think council, we develop a 5-year capital plan. And so I think ultimately knowing if this is something you want us to start considering in terms of that long-term view, I don't know that we necessarily meant that it would necessarily be planned to be added to the first year of the capital plan, but in that 2027 capital planning process.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Putting out like a 5-year schedule and see how it lines up with the long-term planning versus throw it in there in 2027.
All right, Chris?
Code compliance is currently here, correct?
Correct.
So I'm gonna throw a curveball, concept C. Let's mess this up a little. What if there was this concept C where it was just code going over to that building, so the build out isn't so robust, community connections needing a little bit more space for some of their programming, but was that ever discussed of then you would have more space for the band, should it be them, and it's just code that goes there for the office space? Is that a possibility, or was that ever discussed?
We did not discuss that or really explore that as an option. And I guess my understanding of going back to the policy goals, kind of the core, the essential question of this is co-location of warming center operations and community connections or homeless outreach team at McAllister. So no, we didn't consider that, and whether it's possible or the trade-offs, I wouldn't want to off the cuff. I'd have to think about. People smarter than me would have to think about that.
Yeah, maybe that's just a compromise then there's not as much office and the band could stay there, but we can shift some personnel over there instead of the larger personnel community connections. But I get trying to combine those.
Darish?
What is the bus stop currently closest to community connections?
We talked about this. Was it one off Eppinger, I thought? I'm sorry, Councilmember Salzar, I don't remember. I thought it was about a 1/2 to 3/4 mile walk.
That's the reason why I wanted this moved, is because this bus stop that's at this location, all you have to do is walk across the field, which eventually will be a park. And, I think that sometimes we're losing a lot of interest over at the other one because people can't make it there. I mean, do we have any kind of data on that? Of complaints that people are not going to that facility because it's not accessible to a bus stop?
Not that I'm aware, but we can ask.
And another thing, have we reached out into any of the stakeholders like Community Reach? Would they feel that would be a great place for this new facility?
I'll reach to Community Reach to see what they think about this location.
I mean,
No.
because I think that, I mean, honestly, most of the community reaches on that side of I-25 anyway.
Right.
So that would, you know, bring a more wholesome location for everything to be.
So just to be clear, the interest of is whether they would think community connections relocating would be a positive thing. Is that the question? We can certainly do engagement. Again, this is first step of us just providing the information that the council had asked for. So in terms of next steps of process or decision making, I think that was partially the intent of this slide, is to make it, we can help design a process to evaluate this, but to some degree, I think it would be helpful to understand a little bit more what are the policy goals that we're evaluating those, that feedback or those things against.
I feel like when we first originally had this conversation, it was around putting, like, having the wraparound services for the warming center, because the rec center is a rec center and people are going there to be warm, but we had no other services for folks to get connected with things. Nothing there that would help them with other things in life, and that was kind of the intent. So I would be in favor of, originally I thought A, but I think probably B. And I think, well, I like the idea of code and community connections being together. I could see how it would be cramped, and that would, you know, the building isn't, I'm very familiar with the building, spent a lot of time there with Dia de los Muertos. So I could see how that would be kind of cramped, and we want to make sure that this has, you know, accessibility to resources for people that need it. That was kind of the whole idea of it. I also grew up just down the street from the old, or what's now the community connections, and bus service to that area has drastically declined. When I was a kid, I used to be able to take the bus a lot of places, and you can't really do that much from that neighborhood anymore. Being, as you just said, it was you know, a huge, more ulterior road, with Huron being there and everything with McAllister. I think that, I guess the thing is if we look at budgets as moral documents, we've discussed how important it is to serve the homeless in Thornton. And whether it's homeless or people that are just struggling and needing services. And I think that we need to prioritize putting the resources into this building and making the program just more robust through intentional an intentional capital project, or, you know, reconstruction of this area. All due respect to the band and the choir, my son used to be on the band. I dropped him off there many times to play. Love the band, but I know that we have space in other places for them to play, and I know that the city will do their due diligence to make sure they have that space. They are their own 501c3, so it's not like they're owned by the city or anything. They have the name Thornton Community Band, but they are their own 501c3 and have the ability to do fundraising and get funds through SCFD and all that stuff. I've been to the award ceremonies where they've gotten that. So we do have a memo with them. I think we could easily, with support of staff, find another place for them to store their equipment and practice. And I think the original intent with this was to put most of the arts over in the Eppinger original Thornton neighborhood and have McAllister be more of a hub for the community connections needs. So I'm in support of option B, because I think this is an appropriate way for the city of Thornton to be a part of having solutions to issues that affect unhoused people and people that are struggling with food stability and housing issues. So I'm in support of option B.
So let me wrap that around a little bit. So outside of the options A or B, keeping McAllister as a potential, from the policy perspective, the options that are up on the screen right now, what I'm hearing is, number one, co-locate HOT with the warming center.
Yeah.
And two, improve visibility. But then with questions that Cherish asked related to, does that location make sense? In order for people to have access to it based on what community reach is seeing, what other organizations are seeing. So McAllister may or may not be the answer. It should still be on the table potentially as an answer. But the policy goals, I think, are the more important questions tonight,
Okay.
so that they can continue to look at those options.
Yeah, I think option 1 and 2. Like I said, I guess my big thing with just some of the things I've heard is like, totally agree that like we should find space for the community band, but I feel like that's it's an important point, and I think we can find the space. It's just, I feel like it needs to be separate from this conversation about, if we were to use McAllister, it's
one of the
something
pieces of
very
the puzzle.
own. Huh?
It's just one of the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and it's, I don't want us to put off doing something that we could do sooner rather than later if it's just space for the band and the choir, because I know there's other spaces that we have in the city that could be used. I think all the time about our arts areas that I think are underutilized, and we should put that stuff together so it's utilized more. So
I'd have John then Justin.
All right, thank you. Great presentation as always. Following up on, what my colleagues have said, they all have very, very lot of points, Devin and Bird bringing up, the band, the chorus, and then also Cherish bringing up, we need to have something where the folks in need are. So, I agree with, Mayor Pro Tem, for the policy standpoint for concept B. As much as I like to see code together, I reached out to Tansy also earlier about that situation where we can move code to where community connection is now when we move community connections to McAllister, if we go forward with this. But still, we definitely need to get the resources where the folks are. And, just like, the city's collaborated with anything with 2 amazing facilities, one done, one getting ready to be done, we can collaborate with Community Reach Center because they have that big footprint right there, right in Cherish Justin's backyard, that, we can get help to people in need, and that's what we're here for, is to help our most vulnerable. So I am for number 2.
Just oh, you mean option B?
Option B, yeah, option B.
So
Concept
looking
B,
at-
number 2, yeah.
Looking at the policy goals, so I'm still hearing 1, 2, and 4 as the primary on those that are on the screen right now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Justin?
Yeah, policy goals, 1, 2, and 4 are very important. I think that's why this was brought up in the first place. The old council, previous council, so I'm glad that you framed it in that way. So, yeah, I agree. Those are the priorities.
Any objection to that? So I think what you've heard tonight, if I can reframe everything, is that 1, 2, and 4 are the priorities for the policy goals. McAllister is an option, may not be the best option based on those goals. I do think there has been some conversation about the band, making sure there is a space for them, having that conversation. It is, to your point, secondary. However, we do have an agreement with them and an expectation. And so I would not want to kick them out without having a plan in place.
Thank you. I think this is good direction. We'll follow back with some.
Steps here. We've talked about policies, but we're not gonna do nothing.
You're right, we're not doing nothing, but we can't answer the next steps until we answer those 3 policy questions, specifically the location in particular. Does McAllister make sense? If it does, then we come back and talk about whether options A or B work.
So what does that mean? Does that mean we're gonna get alternatives to McAllister, or now that we've framed our policy goals, does that mean that we're looking at sites throughout the whole city now?
I think
Those
what
goals?
we'd like to do is kind of take, there were a number of data requests that came out through. I think we'd like to take that. I think there was some suggested engagement with community partners, not only the band, but in the human and social service sort of realm. So I'd like for us to have the ability to kind of step back and come back and propose some next steps in terms of engagement. It does sound like there was maybe general consensus that this is, we want to act with urgency, but keep this sort of relative within a longer thoughtful prioritization with other resources. So I think all of that is really helpful direction that can help us step back and come back with some next steps to get additional information, get additional engagement, and come back with a more refined set of options.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, fireworks.
Yeah, so many of you probably know Lieutenant Peterson. He's going to be coming to the stage. So I think after last year, after the 4th of July, I think both in preparation and follow-up, I think we wanted to evaluate some of our ordinances to make sure that we had appropriate tools. So some of that has happened. So I'm going to give the floor. We will do just a very brief. We know that fireworks are an area of priority for some of your community members. I'll do just a little bit of a sneak peek, you know, as we start to anticipate enforcement needs. Like we did last year, you do have time on your look ahead to do a really intentional in June. What is our engagement and enforcement strategy? But Lieutenant Peterson will give a little bit of a teaser on some of that tonight as well.
Perfect. Thank you for the intro. We already kind of covered this. Obviously, last year for the 4th of July, we were asked to, legal and the police department were asked to revise the fireworks strategy and look at the ordinance and see if we could improve on that in any aspects, because enforcing it is proven to have been difficult in the past. And after sitting with legal and kind of evaluating it, the biggest issues were enforcement is basically difficult because we have to not only catch somebody in the act of lighting the fireworks, figure out which individual was lighting the fireworks, and then catch them before they run in a house or scatter away or have any of those issues. And then obviously the amount of complaints or calls for service we have on fireworks is a little overwhelming that time of year. And based off of everything we went through, the first change is pretty subtle. We're just taking it from chapter 10 to chapter 38 and placing the ordinance and where it probably should have been all along with all the other things that we write in municipal court. And then also an increase in the max fines, and not necessarily the dollar amount, but the old ordinance basically said first offense was $500, second offense was $1,000, but you had to get that second offense within a 12-month period, which also wasn't super feasible. There's really no teeth to that, because if we write you a ticket on July 3rd, then the next year on July 4th, you're back in the clear to receive the same $500 fine and you don't actually see an increase. So based off of when these happen and that it's a yearly event, 12 months doesn't make a whole lot of sense for that. So we changed that from 12 months to 24 months, so 2 years. So you'd be on the hook for the higher fine for 2 years after your first infraction. And then the bigger piece of that is it will allow officers to cite the homeowner for the infraction for fireworks instead of having to identify the particular individual who had the match in his hand or the lighter in his hand, which will make enforcing that and holding homeowners who are having the parties and doing the big fireworks displays liable, as opposed to just finding the one kid with the match in his hand. This is just a little bit of data just to kind of show you why it was an issue. We pulled this out real quick. As far as last 4th of July, just the night of the 4th, we had over 210 fireworks complaints the evening of July 4th. So if you've got 2 guys driving around the city trying to enforce fireworks infractions and they're getting overloaded like that, that's quite a bit. And then a week in either direction, we're looking at 500 plus complaints for each of those weeks, which can be a little overwhelming. Also, a lot of the complaints that come in are, and rightfully so, I understand, a lot of citizens are upset. They're, you know, this is what's going on. They're hanging up. They're anonymous, which also makes it difficult to get information and actually figure out where things are going on. And a lot of times they don't know where it's going on. They just know they're sitting in their house and listening to fireworks until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, frustrated with it. So I think the couple changes to the ordinance will make it easier for not only to cite the homeowners, but actually do follow-up as well too. These obviously aren't crazy in-depth investigations as far as complexity, but if we get a complaint, we go down there and there's a bunch of firework debris in somebody's front yard and a bunch of people hanging out, it makes it a lot easier to kind of walk up and address the issue with the homeowner. Preventative measures, this is kind of the sneak peek. We had some success last year. We will be using the mobile messaging boards to deploy throughout the city just to reinforce to citizens that fireworks are prohibited in the city. That'll start 4 weeks prior to the 4th of July. We'll obviously work with Kai and PIOs to put out some announcements and obviously our enforcement posture and reinforce that it's prohibited and what you can and can't do. Briefing trainings will be conducted through all patrol shifts to make sure that both sides of the week and all shifts have the same stance and are citing people accordingly with the new ordinance. And community, the CLOs will do what they did last year. We had a lot of success with that, where they're identifying high problem areas from the year before and going out to some of the high density housing areas and actually contacting management and folks that they have good relationships out there, and essentially educating and pleading, especially with our stance this year. I don't know if anybody knows, but we didn't get a whole lot of snow or water this year. So fireworks might be a little bit scarier this year than they have been in the past. So those efforts will also be made on the front end. And then as far as actual additional enforcement efforts, overtime shifts will be scheduled like we have in the past. We've had success with that. We do 2 weeks prior to the 4th of July, 2 weeks past the 4th of July on identified times and dates. Obviously, the weekends become our biggest priorities. That's when we see most of them. Fireworks enforcement cars will utilize unmarked vehicles, which actually helps them. Obviously, you see a marked patrol car from halfway down the block, then we see a lot more scattering. It makes it a little easier to get up there and do some enforcement. We will have 2 fireworks enforcement cars overtime shifts on each day that we deem that we need them, from 2100 till 02 in the morning. Those are our high peak hours for fireworks. And the city event itself for the 4th of July, we have plenty of LE presence at that. So they will be folks that we won't need additional manpower at the event, but on the 4th of July, we will have roving cars throughout the city as well to handle complaints that I know.
Devin.
I'm on a general knowledge kind of absorption thing tonight, so I'm gonna ask lots of questions tonight. Forgive my ignorance, can you explain what the difference when it goes from a chapter 38 to a chapter 10 actually entails?
Not really a whole lot.
Chapter 38 is our is our law enforcement and basically our criminal code of offenses. And chapter 10, our previous versions were just based on the International Fire Code. So what we're doing is we're just moving it for clarity of prosecution. And as the lieutenant mentioned, the really significant change is making the property owner liability provision, because that is consistent with how we handle nuisance abatement generally, because a lot of low-level crimes don't get an immediate response and do require some amount of follow-up investigation, which the 2 cars are not going to be able to do at midnight on the 3rd into the 4th.
And for us, it's really just where it should have always lived. And there's a few things that just never got put, I think, in the right place, essentially. So every beat cop out there on the 4th of July every year goes, what was that statute? Because everything they write in the muni is in a 38 code. And then this one thing they got to write is in some random spot. And then everybody has to look it up and figure out where it is every year.
So that leads into my next question then is, the idea of changing the law so that we write the property owner up instead of the person who's actually holding the match. That seems concerning in my sense, because we're prosecuting without having the evidence of actually pushing the person who actually did it. But what is the situation where it's a rental property or a commercial property, or if it's teenagers who just go out in a cul-de-sac and they're not technically on somebody's property itself?
So you're right, there are proof issues with both kinds. So for example, the kind of situation that is contemplated here is we get a list of complaints over the course of the 3rd into the 4th, and then on the 5th of the 6th, officers are doing follow-up investigations. They go to a property where it was alleged that there was a problem and the lawn is full of debris and burn marks, and then they can make a knock on the door, speak to the to the property or whoever answers the door. They can talk to the neighbors and gather, there's more time, right, to build a little bit more of an investigation. And again, that's classic nuisance abatement issues. You can still issue the citation, or they can still issue the citation to the person who's actually lighting the match in the moment. It's just as indicated, it's rare. And it's this, if you think about it, it's kind of the same conversation that you have, the same problem you have, around college towns where there's underage drinking parties going on and the neighbors are calling it about the hubbub, but there's parties everywhere and there's kids everywhere, and you have to do the same process. So it is a matter of, there needs to be evidence, right, to be able to write it. So it's not just, somebody said that you were allowing people to shoot off fireworks and we're gonna write you the ticket. There's gotta be evidence. And typically what we would also like to see is some evidence that the property owner knew about it and allowed it. So that would just be in the normal course of the investigation, how you develop that. Now, if kids are in the street, just shooting off from the cul-de-sac, that is what it is, and there isn't gonna be a property owner liability. Now, chances are, again, depending on the evidence that's received from the neighbors, it's those two kids who live there. And then the officers follow up on that house saying, who lives here? And you go from there. Now, in terms of a rental property versus a owner occupied property, we can issue I believe we could issue to both, either or, the tenant or the property owner, which is also consistent with nuisance abatement. And we'd have to just figure that out. What makes the most sense in terms of who's allowing it, who's not allowing it. And like with many other nuisance kinds of properties, if you have repeat chronic offenders, part of our programming is to educate the property owner, the landlord, if you will, about the duties that they have to make sure that their tenants are not causing a nuisance to the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk to code compliance. I'm sure that they'll agree that rental properties are great about making sure their tenants are keeping up on everything. So, yeah. Okay, yeah, I just have concerns with the fact that we would go after, because again, it comes down to a situation of, the kids want to run over to the neighbor's house and launch stuff off because the neighbor's out of town. You guys show up the next day, there's debris everywhere, there's stuff everywhere, but then that person's got to prove that, hey, I wasn't even home. What are you talking about?
And for us, that's not gonna be any different than any other crime. The cops that are writing these tickets are gonna have to have probable cause to write the tickets, and there's gonna be some situations where they're gonna go out there and they're gonna look at it and they're not gonna have enough and they won't write a ticket. The reality of the situation for us though is when we go out there a lot of the times, sometimes it is kids and then they run into whatever residents they're actually associated with, and it's usually not real hard to figure out through the neighbors who those kids are and who their parents are. A lot of times even just get a phone number for one of them and give them a call and sort all of that out. And then the other piece is contact with the homeowners isn't usually the issue for cops when we go out on these things, right? Like it's the party, it's the neighborhood thing. Everybody's lighting them off. We go up, we'll talk to the homeowner and we'll get the response. Well, I wasn't doing it. But yeah, you're throwing the party. It's clearly in your driveway. And if nobody here wants to fess up to who was doing it, now, yeah, you live here. You can be liable for this nuisance that we're having and you're allowing this to happen on your property. That's more likely what we're going to see than, but yeah, and when we get to those portions where we can't prove, one way or the other, then it's gonna be like any other crime force, then somebody's not gonna be cited. So.
Thank you.
I have John, then Roberta.
Thank you. Great presentation as always. And yeah, my neighborhood Cherry Lane's always nice and quiet except for the 4th. And then last year, my neighbor across the street from me, because there's like one part of the neighborhood that they do the thing, right? And one of the bottle rockets came into the house. And luckily they were home, so they called 911. And luckily it was about 11:35. So we were winding down at Carpenter with the legal celebration. So they got there like that, which I was greatly relieved for, but still that happens like earlier and they can't, and it could have been a whole different outcome. So I do, agree somewhat with what Devin brings up. We don't want to, we need teeth, because I'm dealing with the e-bike thing right now. We need teeth, but we don't want to be punitive either. So I think this approach still is good. So that way, if you're holding the party and it's obvious, then yeah, you're going to get cited under this updated ordinance. But then you can't prove it, then, then they can't say who's specific, then obviously you can't do that. But still, I am supportive of this thinking.
Roberta?
I'm supportive of this. I guess the concern I've seen from a few residents is, well, first of all, I was wondering if we could get like, I know last year you guys gave us data, but if we could get data from the last 5 years of just to kind of know how many tickets have been written, because I know last year it wasn't very many. I think it's really difficult, and so I'm hoping this kind of changes that situation. But if we could just get the data just so we could kind of see what it looks like, because I think what's more frustrating than anything for residents is that we have this law and then people just continue to break it and it can't be enforced. So my hope is that this will help enforce it better. But it's in San Jose, they allow residents to submit photo and video evidence after the fact, and that enables enforcement even when the officers are not able to respond in real time. Just curious if that would work here. You know, I know there's a lot of legal implications to all this stuff. And then in Long Beach, they've seen a significant reduction in complaints, down roughly about 75% from the pandemic times, after implementing a multi-department strategy that included targeting the suppliers of the fireworks and increasing penalties. Now, I think that's probably something we could look at, but one of our suppliers is Wyoming, right? Like,
Yeah, not far away.
and Adams County. So like, not sure if there's anything that we could support, or if there's like, maybe that would be a state ledge thing or a county thing of like, how do we like work in partnership with our other governmental entities to like, we're sitting here saying that we don't want fireworks in, you know, cities, but they could just hop over to like Devonshire and there's probably some selling them right there. And that's like, just, I mean, that neighborhood thinks they're Thornton pretty much, you know, and they come over here and they have all these fireworks, or, you know, we can't do anything about Wyoming. But it's just that they just, you know, like if it's easier to grab them and light them, and we have these horrible drought situations, just something to think about. But so also like maybe, you know, if everybody agrees on this and we have consensus to move forward, when the ordinance is changed, could there be a clear step-by-step explanation for how residents are expected to report the fireworks, illegal fireworks? That way that we know what tools are available to do that and what platforms to use, whether it's calling the cops, 911, you know, my Thornton app. I'm not sure if that would be an option or not, but just so we know exactly as residents how to report this stuff, so we can make your all jobs easier, but also make sure it gets reported and taken care of. Not sure if that's possible. It's probably just calling you guys. And I know on 4th of July it's crazy, but those are just some of the concerns I've seen, because it's a real thing. Like, you know, I had a resident last year that was like, they're just lighting them and they're going right on my roof, and I could call, but nobody can do anything about it, because by the time you guys get there, you know, I think the thing is you light fireworks and you run, right? You're not like sitting there, I just put a firework, yay. So yeah, those are the questions and concerns I have from residents.
I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I think, you know, working backwards, I think you're right. Adams County should be theoretically an easier fix in having a county regulation for the unincorporated areas, because they're living in the same environments we are with the same drought. We're not, you know, state law would even be better, but it seems to me the easier fix would be going to at least the county. So that's kind of a purview of yours, and then direction to, you know, our lobbying groups and whatnot. But so that's one option. You're right, Wyoming probably is a bridge too far, but I do think though that the bigger, easier fix is going after the unincorporated Adams County issue. As far as the evidence piece about what you had mentioned about San Jose, that is the kind of evidence we look for, right? Is because we, you know, the police department issues tickets all the time based on what we call information and belief. The witness says, I saw this person do X, Y, and Z. And as long as that person's willing to come to court and testify under oath, yeah, I saw so-and-so light that firework, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a police officer being the observer. I will note though, like many other kinds of nuisance abatement laws, we are always very careful, we meaning the prosecutors and the police in getting involved in neighborhood disputes, because a lot of times you get neighbors who don't like each other that have nothing to do with fireworks. It's because their kids got in a fight,
Yeah.
or they make too much noise. And so you have to really be careful about when you're proceeding on prosecuting that you're not falling into that trap.
Yeah.
But again, to answer your question, absolutely, we can do that. And I'm sure that the police department and our office can put together a guide for neighbors to help them, not only with fireworks, but other neighborhood issues. Because quite honestly, that's what we see in the municipal court a lot.
I mean, I was thinking, like I was talking earlier, like about like, Facebook video of what it looks like, or, just like some communications out there. So folks, I think we see all the signs and all the Facebook posts about they're illegal, but like, number one, residents that want to report it are just like, I didn't want to call the cops. And it's like, oh, you should have, they were blowing up a tree in my neighborhood one year and I just did, because I was like, this is getting out of control. Like, where do you draw the line? It's not a black cat anymore. Now it's like dynamite or something, So I guess that's just, just getting people the information, because we hear it all the time and it's just like, it just feels like it's impossible to enforce it. But I do think this ordinance change will help a little bit, for sure.
I think it's gonna help with the pieces that you're asking about too. 'Cause
Yeah.
people do take video quite a bit and they do try to give us stuff, but those were the hangups. Somebody's like, I got video of it. I'm like, that's awesome. And then you show up and then I've got a video in the dark, 6 houses down and I can just see 6 silhouettes out there writing fireworks. Even though I know what house it's coming from, in the past, we wouldn't have been able to enforce that because we can't tell who's doing what down there. Now with that video evidence, it will make it easier for us to know that it came from that location and we don't have to identify the one person who was lighting.
Yeah.
So it will help the evidence that people already collect for us to do. It's just that's been rough in the past. And then the data that you requested is gonna be, we can get that to you pretty quickly. That's pretty.
I imagine. So I think it's residents are concerned, like that was just like last year, I think it was like 1 million calls for service and we gave out 3 tickets and people are like, what? Like, that's just so disappointing, right? Because you're hearing them all night or a week,
Absolutely.
a year.
Sure.
Well, I'm totally on board for this, but I would like to see our mobile messaging boards get out now and talk about maybe, some cities already have them out saying, like cigarette butts plus high wind equals brush fire. And maybe we can start getting those out now and start getting the message out that, and then see them flipped over later. Because we're still obviously in a very high fire danger.
Yeah.
So I would like to see those moved out now.
They're even saying it on the news, like don't do fire stuff outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't park in dry grass, your cars.
So I'm not hearing any objection to the ordinance changes. When would that come to council for a vote?
I don't think we have it on the calendar, but I think the ordinance is prepared, so we can move that forward, pretty quickly. So, we probably won't have that for next Tuesday because we're pretty far and working on the packet, but we can, look at, probably the 28th.
There's one last thing. Could you guys do maybe like when you do the presentation, or when we do the presentation, would it be a consent calendar or would it be an actual?
It'll have to be an ordinance.
Yeah, so that takes 2 readings.
Right.
Okay, so when you guys present that, could you do like just a step-by-step of how to report or what that would look like? So that way it's like out there more and we have that on the meeting too. Thank you.
Your first reading is always on your action calendar. The second reading, depending on how the vote goes, could go to consent, but there'll be a presentation with your first reading.
Yeah, that presentation. Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's talk 4th of July.
Right, and staying on fireworks, so yeah, we've got several themes tonight that are running through. We do Chris Spanky here to and I do want to thank both Chris and Sean Sadler and the purchasing team to move really quickly on outreach to vendors to understand what opportunities are available. So this is just a follow-up to a request from the members of the council at your last planning session.
Good evening, Mayor again, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. Yeah, so I echo Tansy's comments about purchasing contracts and purchasing. They jumped right on this and helped us out to look at some options. So kudos to that team, so. But hopefully tonight, what we'll be able to provide for you is some alternative options to the fireworks show. And you guys can make the best decision you feel that you need to make for the 4th of July. The agenda will be a brief background, the alternatives we just mentioned, and then some options to consider. Let's see. Okay, so if you recall, a couple weeks ago, you gave us direction to look up some alternatives based upon the fire and the drought, and we've done that. I just wanted to remind council that historically, we have not canceled our professional show on the 4th of July. And we have tried to take into account the drought and precautions therein. And then last Tuesday, when we had received all the alternatives from our purchasing and contracts division, there was a little bit of desperation because everybody is first come, first serve. But I do have some good news after talking with those folks today. But so you see that date on there because there was a little bit of frantic first come, first servedness. And that's why we wanted to say it's based upon availability. And then, of course, there is a train of thought out there that if we do have a professional show, that we can provide an alternative for folks so that maybe they're not doing their own illegal show. So this is the slide with really the meat and potatoes. I can't, my eyes aren't that good, so I'm gonna. So we've provided, or at least we have one laser show option. $25,000, 20 lasers, and it's a 15-minute show. We'll come back to that when I'm going to show you guys some pictures on the next slide, and I've made a comment here on the bottom that that's not really our recommendation, but I'll come back to that in the next slide. So then we've got 3 drone options, and you can see with if we take into account the 300 drones, you see a wide ranging price here. The UAV Pro that's offering us 300 drones for $41,000. That's who we have used before for our Winterfest drone show. So that is a company that we have used. Now you can look at show duration. It's not uncommon for a drone show to be 10 to 15 minutes. In this particular case, you see that here, but that is not uncommon. And then the number of designs that is really how many designs that they can create in that 10 or 15 minutes in the sky. So that's what the number of designs are. And then the last box there is Zambelli Fireworks is who we used for our current fireworks show. That's our current price of $42,000, and it's a 19-minute show. So that at least gives you some comparison, lasers, drones, and then fireworks. So here's what why I wanted to show you the different options and then talk about lasers first. For those of you who've been to the fireworks show, folks are scattered all over Carpenter Park. I mean, and when I say all over, it's literally at the Active Adult Center to Colorado Boulevard, etc. They're all over, right? So this laser show is more of a lower profile. It's more attached to a stage. So if we consider everybody that's all over Carpenter Park, I would recommend that we don't go with a laser show and stay more with a drone show as an alternative. And there's a couple examples of 150 drones. So both of those examples up there have 150 drones. We would be doubling that to 300 if we, chose one of these options. There's cheaper options than that even. But that gives you some perspective of what we could offer. And then, certainly holler if you've got questions, but then that kind of takes us to the options. Now I've got Steve Kelly, the fire chief here to help me with the first option, but, option number one's to allow the fireworks show to move forward as planned. Thank you, whoever changed that. The, Steve is, the fire department recommends that, or at least has minimal concerns if conditions continue into July for the fireworks.
So every year we're monitoring conditions prior to launching the fireworks. If we have wind conditions, we will either delay or stop the fireworks from occurring. So that is a practice that we would not change this year either. If the decision is to move forward with the fireworks. As in previous years, we'd put a number of personnel out on the field in the fallout area and around the park to ensure that when we do, if and when we do have starts, that we are there to suppress them. This year, we'll be putting additional resources in place if this is the decision to move forward. And as we move into the event, we could have weather conditions could change significantly between now and the 4th of July. We could have significant moisture and have very different conditions. We could also have continued drought conditions. But as in previous years, we are prepared to mitigate the circumstances associated with those conditions.
And I wanted to mention too, this is the bullet number 3 on this slide. We do use 6-inch shells. And so you've got to provide a fallout zone of 70 feet per inch. So we could lower the shell's size if the council would like to move forward with a show with a lower size shell count or shell size. And so that's option number 1. Option number 2 is replace the fireworks show or the fireworks piece with an alternative that I've showed you. And then just keep everything as is and just replace the fireworks portion of the event. Option 3 would be we have an event from 12 noon to 8 p.m. that's really the existing show with the Corey Brunson band and the skydivers as a finale, and then we send everybody home prior to about 8 o'clock. That option would of course not have any fireworks or drones. And I guess at the end of the day, that has the potential to save some money, but it's not probably the best option. And then of course, number 4 is cancel the 4th of July in its entirety.
All right, I got Roberta and then Devin.
Well, I live right up the street from this show. So if we were to do option 3, what's gonna happen is everybody's gonna go down there, listen to some music, go home, blow up the neighborhood. And that's honestly not great because the fires people make with their own shows are much more dangerous and spread out throughout the whole entire neighborhood and everywhere else. So at least if there's some sort of show in the evening, people get tired enough that maybe they'll blow off less fireworks when they go home. So I don't like 3 and I don't like 4. I like 2 or 1. I'm leaning towards 2.
All right, Devin and then Drew.
If we lowered the shell size, does that affect price, quality of non-fireworks? And changing from a 6-inch to a 5-inch or a 4-inch shell?
That's a very good question. And I have not talked with our firework vendor. So it's going to lower the show. I mean, from a height perspective, for sure.
Sure.
They are, I would consider to be the best fireworks vendor that we could find. So I believe they would try to create a very positive show for us. It just keeps the footprint a little smaller.
Personally, my opinion is, you know, I would like to see what kind of changes that would affect as far as like how much it would lower the show as far as the fireworks, but I think that the fireworks show this year is gonna be a really big deal. I think the citizens are gonna really kind of push for that more. We're in the 70th anniversary of our city. We're at the 150th anniversary of the state, the 250th of the country. I think this show is a critical show for putting that on. So my choice would stay with the fireworks show, but I would be interested in seeing what that reduction, like as far as like height wise would do. And, you know, being that Chief Kelly is, you know, you have confidence in knowing that we're safe in that aspect, I think we go with option one.
Okay, Drew, then Justin.
Yeah, I would agree with Devin, and I love that you guys, the fire department, you have some mitigation there and, you know, business as usual and elevated even for this year. And I'd like to see us continue forward with the current plan. And part of that is in the hope that in 3 months, we've had some rain, you know. And I do feel better about the fact that, you know, if it's a bad day, you know, windy, and, you know, we're dealing with other issues, that there is still the ability to cancel that. It's not like we're forcing ourselves to do the show if conditions aren't right, but at least we have the opportunity to do it still, in the hope that they are great.
Justin, then John.
Well, Chief Kelly, thank you for the highlighting some additional safety measures, and to be honest, I have a lot of trust in you and a lot of faith in you. So if you feel like we can do the fireworks show, keep it safe, given all the with your team, then I'm confident that we can go with option one and keep the fireworks. But I want your recommendations on how to modify it. Anything you suggest, I'm gonna go with.
So we will put what I think are reasonable procedures in place to mitigate the risk associated with fallout from the fireworks show. I think there'll be a question about what the size of the mortar changes would affect the fallout zone. Again, and I am confident in our ability to manage the area as we have in previous years. And I think we've seen fireworks shows where we've had challenging events. It is our ability to put personnel very quickly on those events in a controlled environment to manage them. So that, again, I think that is going to be consistent in that area where we have the fireworks show with previous years. If we do see weather conditions where we're dealing with fire weather watches or red flag conditions, as in previous years, we would be canceling the show, or we would be very closely monitoring wind speeds and wind gusts to determine. We do this with the parachutes as well, of when they can jump, and we do that with the fireworks as well, with a sort of a fallback position of saying no go.
I will add, the community appreciates that much more than saying not happening. If you come out and was like, well, the weather can't do it, they understand that in the moment. John?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Great presentation as always. You know, I agree with, you know, Roberta does have a point with the drones, with the drought situation, but still I am in agreement with the rest of my colleagues that have spoken up. You know, like Devin said, this is the 70th anniversary of our city, 150th anniversary of our state, 250th anniversary of our nation. You know, I think we need to proceed with this. I do want to see about the 5 and the 4 inch, both of them, to see what that footprint would be. And obviously, Chief Kelly, you know, I'm gonna lean on your guidance, you know, day of, time of, you know, if we have to cancel, we have to cancel. And I'll reiterate what Jan said. You know, folks will understand if we have the intent of doing the show, okay, but we have to cancel, darn it, because of we have a high wind warning or whatnot. But if we just did not do it at all, then that's gonna, like that's Roberta's point. Then Cherry Lane's that's where the fireworks is gonna be in Thornton. It's gonna be in my neighborhood. It's gonna be at Brandon Place Park. I promise you that. So we definitely need to have we need to be able to have the capability of doing it day of, but then obviously with your guidance and with your team's guidance, obviously, make a game time decision depending on weather conditions at that time. Thank you.
Last time we had this conversation, I was like, yeah, we should totally not do fireworks, but after talking with a few community members, it was definitely like back on the table for me, because I'm like, man, people just get too crazy. But I think what really helped with that too is the fact that we had the discussion, or I knew we were gonna have a discussion about the ordinance too. Because I think we have to balance it with enforcing that law, and having this show, it does help, like at least that's a little bit of time people are waiting and looking at those fireworks instead of lighting their own. It gets pretty crazy, so.
They're stuck in traffic, they can't get home.
That's, and then they were like in front of my house for
Yeah.
an hour and a half.
So you're providing the beer, is what you're saying?
Yeah, everybody like wants to park at my house and walk down and then come back and.
So I'm hearing we move forward as planned with the mitigations in place as needed. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you, and Rob's gonna close us out here. We actually had received some youth and nonprofit funding requests. There was a request on last Tuesday night to try to incorporate a request from additional organization. We did not get that information in enough time to be in the packet, but I do believe Rob will be able to speak to it at a high level tonight in terms of future forward.
So we've got 4 youth event funding requests and 1 nonprofit funding request to talk to you tonight. I'll go through the background, talk about the requests, and look for your direction. On the youth event funding request, I don't think we've had one of these with this council, so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on the program. This program is laid out in your council policy 5.3 and is intended to assist youth, basically who are competing or participating in an event. So it is event specific, not at least this is your policy, so they're your rules. You've made them up, and I suppose could change them if you wanted to. But as the policy is written, it's really not about supportive of an ongoing program. It's really specific to an event, which these applications qualify. The applicants according to the current process are limited to $300 requests per individual or $600 for a group. And like I said, all these events must meet the criteria in the policy, and the ones that are in front of you do. So this will look familiar to those of you who've been on council. We have 4 youth funding requests, all for robotics competitions or world championships. So one group participating in the VEX IQ World Championship, which I understand is a middle school specific competition, and then 3 others, one on the previous slide and then 2 on this slide, that are participating in the VEX Robotics World Championship, which is a high school competition. So each requested $600 for their sponsorship. Like I said, we also got a request for another event sponsorship, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, so I won't go through the background of that policy or it's actually in your ordinance for reimbursement of travel training. This was for the Dr. Cog 2026 award celebration happening in August downtown. $1,200 for a government sponsorship. I believe you sponsored this last year. So the next slide shows you the budget summary where we are. So to date, we've got $35,000 budgeted for these combined programs. To date, you've allocated $19,800. The additional sponsorships would be 36. The 4 youth plus the Dr. Cog deal would be 3,600. Give you a total expended of $23,400, and the remaining balance would be $11,600. Here's the list of everybody that you've approved thus far. And so we're looking for your direction on the 4 youth and then the Dr. Cog event.
Any objection?
No.
So Tansy had mentioned the Pathways School. So we did reach out to them that was last week after they came and spoke at council, sent them some of the application materials. We they confirmed they've received it and are working on it and have not submitted it back to us yet. So once we have that, we'll evaluate it and bring it back for your consideration. So I'm sorry, we're good on all,
Good on all of them.
all fronts? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next is Board of Commission reports. Any updates? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. I'll give you the short version. I do have a lot of notes. So starting with data, we updated the guiding policies to include our document, to update it so that it includes US 85 and I-76. Really minor stuff, but it was specifically called out that we want to look at those corridors as well. Also, we found out that we at the time we're expecting the Transportation Commission to pass or vote on the 10-year plan in April, but that has since been postponed to May or later. I believe it's May. And we're looking for, we're encouraging anybody to come in and testify during public comments. NADA anticipates the 10-year plan passing as is, but lots of things have happened lately that are difficult to wrap my head around. So you never know. Also, the post 10-year plan, the advocacy shift will move towards advocating for projects on the state transportation improvement plan, and also the DRCOG transportation improvement plan, which is for federal and state funding. And then also always looking at ways to speak in front of CTIO meetings and Transportation Commission. We also, let's see, we heard from RTD, and I think it's worth noting, this wasn't discussed, well, I'll save it because it wasn't discussed at NADA, but maybe we should talk about.
Maybe an item C, the state legislative update.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Moving on to DRCOG, the board work session, there was a discussion on the regional housing strategy. The board expressed strong support for collaborative housing framework and emphasizing opportunities, not mandates. So there is a strong, just like CML, DRCOG is also very united on advocating for protecting local control at the state level and the federal level. Trying to figure out what to skip here. So there's that. There's a presentation on traffic operations program. Just kind of gave an insight into how the signal timing program at DRCOG works. It was very technical. And then there was a conversation about the upcoming Seattle Pier Exchange in May, which I'll be going to. We do have an agenda for that. I'd be happy to share with the council if you're interested as to what's going to be going on. But it's, obviously very transportation and housing centered. And that'll be interesting. Thank you everybody for approving the sponsorship request. And then finally, the DRCOG Budget and Finance Committee meeting. I was elected to serve as vice chair of the committee, and we authorized up to $500,000 to be spent on the Choice Services Transportation Program. Just a little background, that program offers transportation for personal and medical appointments at no cost to adults over 60 throughout the Denver area. It's one of the key programs that DRCOG supports and funds for services for older residents. So very glad that we do that. And that sums up what's your needs.
Other board or committee updates? The AC REP committee meeting, we talked about the RTD bills, so I'll hold off on that too until the state legislative update item. Council discussion items. John?
Yes, thank you. So I talked to Dale Scholes, who's on the ACDOL board, on Monday at the AC for lunch. And on a thing about the e-bike situation, and Drew as well. He recommended that we have a suggested speed limit of 20 miles an hour if they're on sidewalks and on, in our parks. So I'm definitely in agreement with that, but I wanted to bring that up to council tonight and to staff. We need to work on that.
Are we having future discussion on e-bike ordinance?
Yes, so I think there was a request made for a report. We had already begun some cross-departmental analysis and work, so I think, but the feedback's helpful. We'll make sure that that gets to the team that is working on that.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Drew, was your item on this or you have a separate one?
No, I was just gonna go along with the e-bike, but it sounds like that's in the works. I think what I'm hearing from the community really is there's just confusion about what an ordinance versus like what the police are pushing and what makes sense, and also what would make sense based on reality of how people use these bikes in their paths. So, but I'm looking forward to that update.
Just
Okay, a couple of new items. I had an opportunity to meet with people at a nonprofit called the Naloxone Project, which they offer free naloxone to medical providers, community health awards, police and fire departments. I know that Thornton PD and Thornton Fire have distributed these kits throughout our city. And my request to our staff or our council, maybe to give direction, is to see how we can get our Parks and Rec staff to coordinate with the naloxone project to provide training to our staff, and also naloxone in case of an emergency to people who might be overdosing at our parks and recreational facilities where time is of the essence. So I think it would be great to reach out to them, and I think it would also be good to maybe invite them to come to one of our planning sessions where they can kind of give an overview of all the things that they offer, and let us, we can maybe collaborate on how we can get more involved with their, I think, very important cause. So I asked maybe if we could do those two things.
We can certainly coordinate from a parks perspective. I'll leave it to the discretion of the council. Your planning sessions are starting to stack up through maybe middle of summer, but there is.
It's not like
it does.
having them come in wouldn't be an urgent thing, so we could do it at
Could we
any
have them
time.
send us the data? I mean, the
Yeah,
information?
maybe we could just have them send us the.
That'd be
data.
really helpful, because Heidi used to be
Yeah.
the opioids are, right, with under AG Weiser, and
Mhm.
she actually brought that group in to several organizations in the area, so I think some of us have seen it.
Okay.
But if, I would love to get the data and the information that they have.
Yeah, actually, that's even better, because I'm mostly interested in the data, and also I'd like to know how many opportunities they've had to help people in Thornton specifically. And encourage them to apply for TAF grants or even sponsorships, if they are helping as many Thornton residents as I think they are. But most importantly, I'd like to, get our parks and recs also equipped with this tool and trained. It's really easy training, but you could save a life.
Yeah, if you can help with an instruction, we'll
Sure.
follow up on both accounts.
Okay. And then my second issue is, this is a follow-up to our code enforcement presentation last week. And I'd like to see if there's interest in exploring or expanding our volunteer program around code enforcement that could potentially enlist volunteers to help identify code enforcement violations in the proactive way. I'm not suggesting like deputizing them or anything like that, but maybe creating a way to help engage our residents who want to be more involved, and to see what that might look like. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, particularly in Ward 1 and 2. If you remember the map that we saw last week, there's a majority of our violations in South Thornton, and I have heard from many residents that they would be interested in helping out in any way they can. So I'd like to see if we could explore what kind of volunteer. We do have a volunteer coordinator, volunteer program. See if we could see what that might look like with code enforcement.
So I have a few concerns with that, just from a liability standpoint. So worst case scenario, someone goes into someone's property and gets hurt because they're looking at a code violation. Would it make more sense to maybe do some social media training on how to use the app? Because they can still submit the code concerns via the app and still basically take care of those issues without making it a big go forth and find things. It's here's the app, here's how to use it,
Well, yeah, I think you're hitting on kind of what I'm thinking, because I don't really know what this could look like legally. I guess my request is to see what we could do from a legal perspective, liability wise, and maybe I want to do as much as we can. So maybe there's more that we can do, while still staying within the bounds of our liability, not putting people at risk. So it's more of an exploratory request to see like what are the options, what other cities do, and you know, find out from there what our limits are.
Yeah, I would say that we should be cautious with that too, because you run into the situation that you run into a lot of times with HOAs where people get power hungry and wanna go knock on somebody's door and be like, you need to fix your driveway or something's going on, and somebody's gonna tell them, get the hell off their property, it's gonna
Like
get
what we
really
just
bad.
talked about with fireworks, or it has
Yeah,
nothing to do with
so-
code violation.
I just wanna be clear, again, my request is not to stand up a program right away, and based off of what we talked about here. I wanna hear your concerns, I wanna hear what staff's concerns would be, and what this could look like. I wanna start a conversation, not end a conversation, so my request isn't to go do something right away. My request is to open the door for a deeper conversation.
And what is the objective again?
The objective is to
For
help
the
our
resident-
code enforcement team with the tremendous amount of work that they have to do.
Yes.
So like we're exploring citizens doing more than reporting the code violation, which they can do now.
Well, we are asking our staff to find out what is in the universe of possibilities to engage volunteers to help us with the objective of reducing code enforcement violations across the city. And because there is a willingness among residents.
Yep.
We don't know how they can achieve that goal. And I don't think the council is equipped to answer that question. So my request is to ask our staff to help us have that conversation. And then we can decide whether that is too much risk for us or not. There's just too many unknowns. And unless we ask our staff to help us out, we'll never know.
But my question is also like, what's stopping them from doing that already with the My Thornton app?
Well, because stuff that's being reported isn't being followed up on.
That's a
That,
different issue.
that's a different situation than having somebody reporting stuff to help code compliance.
Well, one, there's, as Mayor Coleman said, there's opportunities with the app itself, but there's not that much engagement. People don't know how to use it. So maybe what we end up deciding to do is a training program just on how to use the app, a social media program. It could be more than that, but we don't really know what the possibilities are unless we actually put some work into it. I think this is a worthy cause of putting some work into it instead of just shutting the conversation down tonight.
I don't think I'm shutting the conversation down. I think I'm just asking a question of
Um,
what would they do outside of that? Because they can't go onto the properties, they can't enforce the code compliance.
Well, what I'm saying is let's have a more robust conversation. I don't have the answers to your question right now. And I think that we could get some of those answers if we ask our team to do a little digging to see what kind of opportunities there are. That's all I'm asking for.
I think it's looking for more of it's a broad request and maybe narrowing the request to make it a little easier for staff, because the broad request of how do we get people engaged with code is very vague. But if there's something specific to look at what other cities are doing, that might be easier for the concept to be able to be followed.
I'm happy with starting with just looking what other cities are doing
Related to,
engaging volunteers in their code enforcement effort.
We can do some research. I'm not, I will say I'm not casually aware of programs like that, I think. But we can try to understand what might exist or what opportunities, how to leverage our existing tools. So it sounds like you're open to a broad set of recommendations. I think we can, without a lot of work, try to understand if there are any programs out there that we can model on. And if there are not programs that exist, so are there some more specific policy direction or questions that we would need to, if this was about creating a new program, from scratch, what kinds of direction or questions we would need to have answered?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
objection to that?
Yeah, I think you have Citizen Academy and others that might participate, and I know that we use them for certain events and stuff, so. I don't know the end goal like what he's saying, but I think there are willing volunteers that might be able to help code, and there's much.
Pick up trash.
Yeah.
Pretty sure we have that volunteer program already.
Yeah, so if there's an opportunity for some sort of volunteer program, sure, why not?
Is that clear enough?
Yeah, I think I might reframe this maybe a little bit in our research to be more about what does engagement and education look like in this space? And that could include volunteerism, but could include other kinds of education outreach or engagement. If we've got kind of some latitude, I feel that more comfortable that we might find some practices that we could learn from.
Anything else, Justin?
Nope.
All right, any other council discussion items?
I had one.
Oh, go ahead, Roberta.
It's pretty easy. I just wanted to see if we can do Autism Acceptance Month, Arab American Heritage Month, and Earth Day for the month of April.
Any objections?
Let's do it.
Anything else? Evan?
One of the things that came up in one of our former meetings, I don't know if it was the last planning session or the meeting right before that, was regarding council and travel policy concerns. It kind of strikes curiosity with me, and I kind of want to push something out with the rest of the council as well, is that I would like to see, maybe it's a request for, I don't know if it's necessarily a request from staff or from council as a whole, but I would kind of like to see a more transparent layout of when we're traveling in regards to the city itself as a council, not necessarily posted to public because I know that causes security concerns, but anytime that we're traveling, it's gonna be based off of the taxpayers' money going through that is being shared between all of us so that we're aware of these kind of travel things that's going through and what the kind of cause is there. My concern is that it would turn into like a Diderot effect and kind of get out of hand unless we can kind of keep each other in check, because it's not really the staff's point to keep us in check. It's more us going, hey, what's going on with the travel and what's happening there? So my request would be that when we're traveling to different conferences for different committees, different meetings, that we relay that information on our calendars so that we're all aware and kind of share that information back and forth with each other so that it kind of gives that transparency and ideal there.
So when we do travel, if there's 3 or more of us, it does have to be posted publicly.
Correct, but I'm just saying, even if it's an individual aspect of it, so we're all on different committees and things go from not necessarily just statewide, but it goes national wide as well. So if we travel for specific committees, for instance, you and I are in the same committee that the rest of the people aren't in, so that would be something that they may not be aware of a conference coming up or something's going on, but we're sharing that information with each other so that not only are we aware of the spending and stuff that the city's putting in place for all of this, but also for the awareness that, hey, these council members aren't going to be here during this time. Now, I do not want that shared publicly because in the sense of when we're traveling, because I think that that's a security concern for all of us and our families, things of that nature. But if it's shared between all of us internally, I think that would be a good kind of move.
Are you specifically saying more like the notices we get like from Patty and Joanna, just like, all right, Bird and Fran are out this week?
Similar. But more of a, instead of it just going, hey, Drew's out this week, it's more of a, hey, Drew's out this week because he's at NLC's Energy Commission or whatever the situation is going on, so that we're aware of, hey, he's out, but he's actually still doing things, just helping our city because he's doing something for a committee that's there, and we know that it's not a, hey, Drew's out because he wants to go sit on the beach.
Florida guy.
Nothing's wrong with that.
There's already a week I'm gonna miss because I'm gonna be sitting on the beach, so I'm not saying that, but
So is this like an interim until we do a full, because we did already request a full reevaluation of our travel policy. So is this in the meantime?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Emil.
With a few more emails, right?
No problem.
Anything else, Devin?
Nope, that's it.
Any other council discussion items?
So can I clarify really quickly? So that from a protocol expectation, people will communicate that to our admins and the CMO, and then we'll share that out just to make sure there's no.
Yes, because I mean, I feel like right now it's kind of the situation now anyways, so we're going
Yeah.
to Patty and Joanna and something like, hey, we're gonna be flying out to here for this. So they already kind of have an idea on it.
So we will provide a lot of details, but give general a heads up. And I think generally we would prefer communication that's going to everyone to come from staff rather than you all sending emails to everybody, so.
But yeah, like, I mean, he's right. There is the summer meeting for NLC's Energy, Environment, Natural Resources Committee that I chair and Devin is now on. We'll be attending that, so.
Okay, we'll try to, if people can just make sure our office is in the loop, we'll try to work with Joanna and Patty to make sure that we've got some way to get that information back out.
Thank you.
All right, state legislative update. Justin, would you like to start? Well, the RTD.
Oh, you want me to? Sure.
And maybe this is a question for Peggy, because I don't think the bill's been introduced yet.
Yeah, so, I guess, just a summary, RTD is, I was actually more gonna talk about the front range passenger.
That's what I meant. Sorry, not RTD, Front Range Passenger Rail. I'm sorry, Troy Whitmore was on our call for AC rep and talked about it, and he's the RTD director,
Sure.
but yes.
Well, just the Front Range Passenger Rail District has been in the works for a while now, and one of the requirements to make this rail program happen is creating a new special district with taxation abilities. And we were over the years or months previously told that, you know, Thornton is not included in that district because we didn't have any stations within the mile buffer of, you know, none of our city was within a mile buffer of those stations. Well, within the past few weeks, the group, I don't even know who's the Front Range Passenger Rail group that is trying to put this committee together, has expanded those buffers to 3 miles, which now includes a segment of West Thornton. It includes
One little street.
very small part of Friendly Village Mobile Home Park and some of Redwood Estates Mobile Home Park. So the western edge of.
Neither of which will be taking the Front Range Passenger Rail to Boulder.
So this has some severe consequences to the city of Thornton, because now that we have territory in that buffer, the entire city would then be a part of this district, which means that we would be included in that. There'd be extra sales taxes added on to as part of that district. So this is obviously not good for Thornton, and because we're paying for it, but we're not getting the benefits of the station or the train. And you know, many people, including myself, think this is by design. The large city, and Front Range Passenger Rail is expensive. So I don't know where this is going legislative. I don't know what happens next, but it's on the table. So maybe
I think we need Peggy to reach out. A bunch of us found out about it at the extravaganza, talking with some of our other elected officials there, that this would be coming shortly. I don't think it's been introduced. I don't think there's a number assigned yet, but we were told it was coming very quickly. So if we could have Peggy dig in.
Michael Farrington called him today and told him he was in contact with the governor's people because he used to work one of those offices, and he told us that it was sounding like Thornton would get some exclusion. They would do 3 miles and then just carve out and do that exclusion. That was like at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
We
so
probably
I
need
know-
some confirmation on.
Right, I'm just knowing that was the most recent, and it was just a few hours ago that he was telling me that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but that also makes sense. Like, just carve us out, do a 3 mile radius. That's a very simple solution. Otherwise, we're gonna raise hell.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're gonna cost you a lot of money in lawsuits.
Have we taken a position on SB 26150?
Remind me which one that is.
This is the one that shrinks the board and everything.
We took a monitor position to ask them about what they would consider changing, specifically related to the elected
I just-
officials versus Dr. Cog versus appointed.
Okay, all right. I just,
That came up in our AC rep
It did.
okay,
meeting as well.
okay.
Metro mayors also talked about it, and same thing, concern about the elected positions. One of the questions that came up was, would we support
Well, I remember talking about this now, okay.
all of Dr. Cog, or all of the 4 positions appointed coming from Dr. Cog, and the consensus was not necessarily because it's so Denver centric,
Mhm.
that we wanted more representation outside of that area.
And we talked about not, and we talked about too much power from the governor's office. Talked about that here, okay.
Yes.
I just wanna make sure, cause they were,
Seven
our-
and the 2 appointees we
Yeah.
were trying to go. That was also on the same call.
yeah, RTD was taking a position tonight and I got hit up on some stuff, so I was just.
Do you know what position they took? I was assuming that they were going to be opposed, just because.
Yeah.
So.
Troy said they hadn't discussed it yet, so.
Directly.
I think you're at amend. Our monitor.
Well, and the conversation was a smaller board makes sense. More pay makes sense. Additional technical support makes sense, but not as an appointed board position.
Yeah, so it just seems like they're, yeah, they're just getting a lot of push to not go against the state legislature.
Right. I'm sure we'll hear more next week. Any other state legislative items coming up? All right, if you could let Peggy know.
Yeah, we will.
All right, thank you all very much.